When Ben got back, he noticed Thera in the living room, completely absorbed in her studying. Rather than bother her while she was in the middle of it, he instead opted to get dinner started since Sonia wasn't home yet. He looked around the kitchen for whatever ingredients were on hand and decided to try and get creative with it for a change instead of going off a recipe he knew. As with every time his crafting improved, he'd gained an almost instinctual understanding of how to use the different materials and ingredients he was already familiar with and thought it might be fun to see just how far that would go. He grabbed a variety of vegetables he thought would go well together, as well as some of the spices he liked, and diced them all up into fine pieces before breaking them down further into a fine puree. Once that was done, he grabbed a few pieces of meat to start marinating, while trying to figure out a sauce to go with it once he was done, ultimately deciding that a spicy cream sauce was the way to go. Well, sort of a cream sauce at least. Ben wasn't sure it really qualified when the liquid in question wasn't farmed from anything that would qualify as a mammal, but in the end it didn't matter as long as it tasted good. While that was cooking down, he worked on speeding up the marinating process, having finally gotten the hang of reducing the cooking time for ingredients the same way he could reduce the crafting time of materials by running mana through them in the correct way, something he'd only begun to manage after he had gained complex mind to look after it. By the time the sauce was done, so was the marinating process, and he cooked and diced the meat soon after. Finally, he ended with the veggie puree, adding an egg to it as a binder from some sort of large amphibian-like species, and taking out scoops to fry like a pancake in hot oil. When he was done, the house was filled with the smell of his cooking, and he turned around to get Thera to feed as well as see if Sonia was home, only to find them chatting at the table already. "Oh hey, didn't notice you guys." "That's because you get way too invested in your work," Thera told him while eyeing the food with hunger. "I only just got in," Sonia said, smiling. "It smells great though. What did you make?" "I just felt like getting a little creative with it, so it's not really anything." Given the ingredients he used, he wouldn't really be able to compare it to other things from his homeworld, but he was positive it would taste good at least, and they seemed to agree once they dug in. "I have to say, it really is a treat having someone with a high crafting skill around to cook," Sonia told him between bites. "Thanks, but it's not like a meal from someone with a pure cooking skill," Ben said, thinking back to the meals in Analia and how, as much as he enjoyed the jack-of-all-trades master of none role his skill seemed to give him, some things were better when there was a specialist around. Sonia though seemed to disagree. "Maybe that would be true if we're comparing it to someone with blessed cooking, but people with that are exceedingly rare. Your blessed crafting could blow away an average cook." "Huh, well thanks, I'll try to make sure I'm back at a decent enough hour to do my fair share." It was good for his practice too. He couldn't expect to raise his crafting if he only focused on smithing and alchemy. With that thought in mind, he looked at the two women in front of him. He'd also bought plenty of sewing supplies while in Analia. Maybe if he picked up some fabric he could make them some shirts or something to practice that aspect of his crafting skill. Assuming his teacher was right, he should be close to getting the next level already. He shouldn't neglect it. While he let himself get lost in thought, Thera and Sonia began talking about her magic practice. "So how is it looking for you so far?" "UHG, it's too early to say it's going bad, but I still don't have a feel for life mana. On the plus side, I got to enjoy something exceedingly obvious being pointed out to me that might help, so maybe after I get some more reading done I'll be able to have a better understanding of it, or at least an easier time leveling it up than I would otherwise." Sonia seemed to hesitate for a moment before letting herself make a suggestion. "You know, if you are struggling to feel life mana at all, you could try talking to Vividus. She would be able to fill you with far more life mana than I ever could." Thera grimaced at the suggestion, but understood where her aunt was coming from. "Maybe if I can't get the Zeroth level after a year or two," she told her unhappily. "I'd rather not have to deal with her if I can help it." "Of course, and there's no reason to do it at all if you don't want to, it's just the best suggestion I can think of." This might be a dumb question, but couldn't a regular life spirit help?" Ben asked, prompting a thoughtful look from Thera. It was true that regular life spirits would possess more mana than Sonia by a significant amount, they just tended not to use it since casting their spells would weaken them as they waited to regenerate it, And nothing would really interact with them anyway, so they had no reason to. Having said that, if she got a few of them to do it, there shouldn't be any real risk. It all just came down to finding one to ask. That might be worth trying, she said thoughtfully. I'd have to find a spirit and ask if it could contact any life spirits it knows and send them my way, but that shouldn't be too hard. I'll just have to see if I can find one outside of town. Do none hang out in the area? I'll see some occasionally, but even if things have improved for me a bit, I don't want to be caught seemingly talking to myself by anyone. The only time I know that people can see spirits other than me is when their skill level in a given magic is high enough, and I don't think anyone in the town meets that qualification. As she thought about that, Thera asked how his own training had been going, and Ben gave them both the rundown of the day, as well as getting Sonia's help to apply some of her charm to one of the rings. Once the meal was done, Ben retired to his room for the night and sat at a desk within it, placing the box of mithril on top of it, as well as grabbing a pen and paper. He placed his ringed hand on top of the mithril and using one of his minds worked on creating and destroying a variety of enchantments that would be useless to have on a mithril block. With his other mind though he did something he'd been thinking about since they left Analia, writing a letter to his friends Will and Steph. They kept in touch through mail like this since he arrived in the world. From his modern perspective it was horribly slow and inefficient, but there were no other options, at least for an average person like him. He thought about what he wanted to say and how best to say it, before just giving in and writing what he felt as he put pen to paper. He wanted to visit his friends. Not immediately, he'd only just gotten back to Stonewall and needed to work on his skills, but in 2 or 3 months if they could make time with their own training to see him it would be nice. Talking to Carly about her own anxieties had made him realize he needed to actually make time for some of the people he cared about in the world. Oh, thank the gods, finally. In the days that followed their talk, Thera had gone off to search for any spirits and was finding herself growing exhausted. Usually, she would come across 1 or 2 a day as they would float around, but it was only now after days of searching she'd managed to come across an air spirit just at the edge of the forest, mercifully far from anyone who might catch her talking to herself. Hello there, she started, unsure how to lead the conversation now that the opportunity was finally here. Do you think I could take some of your time? It was quiet for a moment, and even though it appeared as a dense ball of mana to her, lacking any distinguishing features, she got the impression it was appraising her. I suppose I could stop my journey along the air currents, Earthkin. What may I do for you? Thera was instantly taken aback. Normally when spirits would communicate they would do so through mana, but that wasn't what was happening here. The spirit she had encountered was talking normally, in a way anyone could hear. Is that a sound spell? I was lucky to see one of the non-spirits perform it and found it interesting. To communicate through the vibrations in the air, what a novel idea. Of course, if you prefer I can talk normally. No, this is fine, I was just surprised. I was hoping you might be able to give me some help and direct some life spirits my way if you can. If I see any wherever the wind takes me there's no issue, but how would any find you? You seem to lack presence as the other non-spirits do. Thera turned back and pointed towards the town. I can usually be found in the town over there if you can direct them that way. Just that one little spot in this large world? How suffocating. She knew the spirit didn't mean anything by it and tried to let the attitude slide. They both experienced the world in such different ways that some aspects needed to be excused, especially when one was a creature that rode the air, never to be tied down. Maybe, but it's home. All right, Earthkin, I will spread the message to those I see. Give my regards to the Great One. I will let my father know, she said, before thanking the spirit and letting it go on its way. Air spirits were nice in that they typically didn't like to chat for too long. An earth spirit on the other hand was more than content to stay in one place and talk her ear off and likely would have taken ages to fulfill her request. With that done, she made her way back to town and decided to stop in at her uncle's shop for a bit while she was out. After spending the last few days searching for any stray spirit on top of continuing her studies and magic practice while at home, she needed the break seeing Falk and Ben could provide, even if her friend was busy practicing one of his skills with a single-minded dedication. When she got there, Fock was sitting in the front looking emotionally exhausted while Ben was nowhere in sight. "Everything okay, Uncle?" she asked him with concern. Thera, yeah, everything's fine. The boy's doing some apostle stuff in the back and it was a little too strange for my taste." "What?" Instead of answering, Fock instead held out a hand pointing her to the back room, and without a need for further prompting she went to take a look. When she turned the corner she was left not knowing how to react when she found Sakhel, Raelia, and Sko all kneeling in front of Ben, seemingly in prayer, while Ben stared off into the distance giving a half-hearted one himself. They briefly made eye contact before she gave a quick sorry and left to walk back to spend time with her uncle while he finished whatever it was they were doing. At least she tried to. "Wait, Thera, stop." He called out to her and she could only sigh. "I guess I won't abandon him to whatever the hell this is." "So what's going on, Ben? This looks interesting." "Oh, you know, just my God being a bastard," he said with false cheer, but his comment immediately caused the three praying towards him to whip their heads up and open their eyes wide in shock. He ignored the reaction though, and went on. "It looks like Myriad decided to out me as his apostle." "Okay, but then all this is..." It was Sakhel who answered the question she left hanging. "I was given a quest by him," she said, beaming. "So I wanted to make sure to pray before we went off to do it." "And you're all praying to Ben because..." "Since Sko and I are helping her, we all came to pray at her God's church," Raelia told her, seeming conflicted about the whole thing herself. "When we found out it was in town we weren't exactly expecting this, but it never hurts to have a God smiling down on us." Of course, the details were left unmentioned. "And it looks like having a believer as well as non-believers pray to Myriad's representation/zipper acts as decent job experience," Ben told her, full of exasperation. "By having them do this for a while as I'm wearing it, it looks like it counts me as acting as the head of the church, so I need to take advantage as long as they're around and willing." "And you're all fine with this?" she asked, addressing the group specifically for the first time. While she could see hesitation from the other two, Satchel had none. "Of course," she said proudly, eyes shining. "To find out I've been receiving guidance from the apostle of my God this whole time, what's a few hours of prayer if it means giving thanks to Myriad for giving me the chance to complete a quest? I guess that's reasonable," and she stopped as something Sakhel said caught her attention. "Wait a minute, hours? 2 so far," Ben said with exhaustion. "But since I'm technically acting as head priest of the First Church of Myriad, I've managed to gain 2 whole job levels, so I'm dealing with it. The sooner I complete this one the better." "Well, good luck with that," she told him and took her leave to go back to talking to Fock. Her uncle had been right, that whole situation had been too weird, not to mention her complicated relationship with the group in question. Satchel and Raelia seemed content to try and act casual around her, but Sko had been the biggest pain to her of all since she had her problems with Roan. It would be nice if he were to say something about it, maybe even an apology? She shook her head and tried to clear her thoughts. "It doesn't matter what that asshole thinks or does now anyway. My standing in the town has improved enough that people seem content to just leave me alone, and Ben can always back me up if anything happens. Seems like he could at least get Sakhel to keep him in line for me. It's kind of freaky how she wound up so devout all of a sudden." Not that she couldn't understand a bit. Meeting Analia had been a deeply moving experience, even if there was some chaos during it. Really, maybe the issue was more Ben being completely indifferent to having near-daily interactions with such a being. She couldn't imagine many other apostles so casually referring to their God as a bastard, no matter how close some of them might be. The distance between God and mortal should be too big for that sort of behavior for all but those who might bridge the gap. She sighed and tried to ignore it. She'd long grown used to Ben's attitude toward Myriad. Maybe it was a good thing for his God to have someone like Sakhel to balance him out. "Are you sure about this, Myriad? Honestly, she seems like she's gotten way too into you way too fast. I'm more than a little worried here. It might shock you given your own attitude, but most people in the world would react this way upon not only receiving a blessing and a gift skill, but also a quest and personal guidance from an apostle. I don't currently know any other gods doing so much for their believers. I mean, sure, but it's all coming from a pretty self-serving place, isn't it? Ben said, chastising his God. You're giving your blessing and gift skills to all of your believers as soon as you can to make yourself more appealing to anyone who might think of converting, and you got me to train her a bit 'cause we live in the same town and she's the first person other than me to get connect. Not to mention your goal for giving her a quest. You don't think she'll go for it? No, I think she would have even if you didn't offer her a quest, but I guess it's probably good to have her work towards earning you some more recognition before you offer her the role of your oracle or head priestess. Doesn't hurt to see if she's more suited to one over the other anyway while she does it. The main mortal representatives of any god would fall into one of three categories. The oracle was in charge of sharing the message of their god, spreading the word of their teachings and faith, getting the information from the source directly. The head priest, or in this case priestess on the other hand, was more responsible for a leadership role, taking charge of any of the priests beneath them as well as the common believers to help them grow as a whole. Finally there was Ben's role, the one he'd found himself in by virtue of there being no other takers, the apostle. In principle he should be acting to take on both positions, both spreading the word of his God as well as acting as a leader for myriads followers, but both of them knew that wasn't something he was going to take too seriously, hence the need for someone more responsible. Anyway, I vote that if you're giving her a role it should be oracle, Ben told Myriad, and continued to explain his reasoning despite the fact his God had undoubtedly heard what was going through his head already. As it stands, the majority of your believers are enchanters and follow you for the benefit your skill provides them to make the resistance braces. Since Sakhel is currently the only non-enchanter, I don't think she should be taking on a leadership role, at least not at the moment. A surprisingly reasonable argument, but on the other hand, if we go on with the initial idea from when you first recruited her of trying to gain more followers from those who want to awaken their skills to plant magic, it wouldn't be a bad idea for a priestess with the same goals to try the recruiting. In the end, we also have the option of letting her choose. Vetoed, Ben told his God, making an X with his arms. I told her you're a small god, but it's not like I let her know she was going to be your second believer, or that your current number of followers amounts to what, 20? I wouldn't want the risk of her learning that you don't have an oracle or a priest scare her off. We should make it sound like the spot opened up and you thought she would be good for it, so we need to take some time to figure out what might be the best fit for her. Well, we have some time at least. Her quest was to complete an achievement in my name and it sounds like what she's thinking of trying might take a while. Really, she picked the achievement one? She didn't get to pick anything. She's currently just a regular believer after all. I gave her the one option I could give to any of them. Ben nodded, happy with the information. It was good to know other believers weren't out getting better options than him after all. That's something else I've wanted to ask you too. What exactly qualifies as an achievement for you? Myriad was quiet in thought for a moment before answering. It can be many things. It can involve overcoming an obstacle impressive enough to earn you renown, such as slaying a powerful monster or completing a trial like you just did. You could also do something to help my believers as a whole, or any act that could earn you great admiration and direct it to me. In your case, maybe if you created another ultra-rare item and then bestow it upon a warrior who worships me, not that there currently are any. Giving a weapon like that to one of the warriors who's going to fight for the world could also work. All good to know, but Ben's focus stuck to the second option. Wait, Myriad, to be sure you're still only at around 20 followers? 22 at the moment. I've received prayers from others who seem to be considering converting at the wishes of their nations but are unsure. As Myriad answered, he heard the thought going through Ben's head and the simple but effective plan he was forming. That would work, his God said aloud. Ben's smile grew. It was so simple really. It would be a couple weeks before any of the new believers got their gift skills, and all of the believers, but Sakhel currently were enchanters who thought the only use of the skill they would be using was to create resistance braces. If he revealed to them that the skill could be used with enchanting to make use of any skills, wouldn't he be helping Myriad's believers as a whole to gain new knowledge that could improve their work and their lives as a result? Not to mention that if he sent the information to anyone who was on the fence as well, he was sure he'd be able to snag a few more as converts. Myriad, wake me up and get me the mailing info for all of your current and potential believers. I accept this quest. Received quest, glory to God. He was going to be spending hours writing and rewriting 30 to 40 letters, trying to give detailed information on how to properly use the skill, and all of the information on it he currently had, but it didn't matter. In a few short weeks he would be gaining at least 5 levels of job experience, maybe a bit more if he got enough people to convert with this knowledge, and through that being one step closer to completing the job and on his way to taking enchanter. Ben had just come back from taking all of his letters to be delivered and started preparing breakfast when Thera got up for the day. They had a long one ahead of them now that it was the weekend and they were going on their first multi-day hunt together, so he made a big meal for them to tide them over for the bigger part of it. After eating they made their way to the guild for the first time in weeks to see whatever quests might be available to them. As Ben opened the doors and walked in, there was a change immediately. Everyone seemed to be talking up a storm, excitement clear in their voices, but one by one, adventurers present started noticing them and started quieting down, many with complicated expressions on their faces. How were they feeling at the moment? While plenty had come to apologize to Thera after the incident with Roan, that didn't erase their previous treatment of her, and some were sure to still consider her at fault. He was immediately prepared for a fight and felt Thera tense up beside him as well, half expecting the worst, but the tension broke in an instant as a familiar face, or lack thereof, called out to them. "Thera, Ben, it's been so long." Ankh yelled out from across the counter to them. "Has everything been all right?" "Hey Ankh, it's good to see you too," Ben told them, happy to feel the eyes around them go back to their own business. "Ben just had to take a trip for his job and I went to help him," Thera explained lightly, trying to leave the more interesting details to the side. "We were looking to take a quest, but is everything okay here? Seemed like things were pretty crazy when we came in." "Oh my, you haven't heard yet? I guess news just broke, so it shouldn't be too surprising, but it looks like one of the groups of summoned individuals from a year ago came from a world far advanced of anything we can imagine, and they've made contact to help us. It sounds like they're going to try to work to track the invaders' homeworld for us and see if any of their technology might work here." Even without a face, Ben could detect the excitement coming for their favorite guild employee, but Ben tried to look as surprised as that bit of information should have made him if he wasn't directly involved with it happening, even going so far as to activate Hidden Mind in the hope it would keep some of his true emotions from showing. "What, that's unbelievable," he said, not feeling like he sounded as surprised by the news as he should and jealous of the fact that Thera had the benefit of her face being covered. Even though the alien that led them to Carly and Glob on the trial seemed to try to keep itself out of her sight, once Ben confirmed everything and had agreed to help the world, as well as himself, he gave her a rundown on what happened and got to see her shock firsthand. Luckily for him though, Ankh didn't seem to notice any issues and went on. "It's like a miracle, isn't it? An entire world, powerful and ready to help us as much as they can. We actually have allies for what's to come." "Ah, that makes sense." When he thought about it like that, it sounded like before the invasions, separate worlds didn't have much or any contact with each other except in rare cases. This was probably one of the few times a world wasn't facing the threat alone. Even if they couldn't provide soldiers, the knowledge that could be gained from reconnaissance would be invaluable, not to mention the potential for technological development. Maybe this really was something to get emotional about. Thera though seemed to find the entire topic uncomfortable given her knowledge on how it came to pass, and was more than happy to get them back on track. "That's really exciting and all, but we were looking for a quest to take. We were planning on going into the deeper woods, so we don't have any problem with something that would be 2 days if we include travel time." I'll see what I can do, but would you mind if I see your cards first?" Neither of you updated them since the town was attacked. Rewards need to be distributed and contributions determined. Obediently they both handed over their cards, and as something she was checking them something changed in her demeanor. Ben wasn't sure what until she leaned in close and spoke in a low voice. "You've both completed a trial?" He was caught off guard. It wasn't a big deal for people to know, but he hadn't been spreading it around since it sounded like a pain. The fact that it was apparently viewable to the guild the same way their kills and contributions were wasn't something he'd been expecting. "We did the one in my homeland," Thera calmly answered, seeming to have expected this. I see. Well, with that being the case combined with your previous accomplishments in protecting the town, I'm happy to tell you both you've made it to rank 5. Even with her face covered, Ben could tell Thera was overjoyed. When they first started to work together, she seemed to want to gain achievement to raise their ranks. Now they had. Ben, on the other hand, cared significantly less. Even if they couldn't take quests for the higher ranks, they could still hunt whatever they felt like, and all this meant was an increase in responsibility should an emergency occur. Still, if it made Thera happy, he'd take it as a good thing. At worst, he could just quit the guild if she ever found a real party to work with. He would just have to make sure he got everything from their archives he could before that happened. In that case, do you have any rank 5 quests we could take? His friend asked, excitement filling her voice. There's a couple options, but if you're looking to go to the deeper woods, there's one we need to get done, though the reward is smaller than a typical rank 5 quest. We need someone to collect some specific plants for us. Since it's in a more dangerous section of the woods, we can't ask any lower ranks to do it, but it would be a big help to the guild, and we'll do our best to find you better quests in the future for doing us this favor. Ben looked to Thera, waiting for her to answer. After all, he didn't care one way or another what they ended up taking, and it wasn't like they couldn't fight any beasts they found as they went. We'll do it, she said confidently, her willingness to take a non-combat related quest stemming from her current happiness at her rank increase as well as the promise of better quests in the future. Could we get a description of the plant, and how many would you want? Give me a moment, the guild member told them before walking to the back and grabbing a book, flipping open to a page with what appeared to be a small shrub. This is the one you'll be looking for. You only need to collect the smaller branches from it, but of that take as many as you can. I can loan you the book while you go to help find it, but if it's lost or damaged, there will be a fee taken from your reward or future rewards should you fail the quest. Is that acceptable? Absolutely, Ben told them as he grabbed the book. Does this have information on all of the medical plants in the area? Medical and poisonous plants, yes. It was perfect, and Ben immediately started flipping through the pages, seeing what other plants were in the area. He remembered cursing himself on the trial for not taking the time to prepare any potions or medicines, as well as not working on his alchemy beyond what he needed to prepare weapons. If he was already going to go out, then there was no harm in taking the time to gather any useful plants for himself as well. And now that they had 2 spatial bags sent to them thanks to Polinia's gift, they could potentially make quite the harvest. After spending the better part of the day walking out, they were finally in the general area. They could expect to find some of the plants. They'd lost plenty of time to Ben having to stop and gather others from the book he thought he could put to use, as well as letting Thera practice some of her magic on passing creatures. But aside from that, they'd managed to keep a reasonable pace and were in the middle of setting up a camp while there was still light leaking from between the trees. So is any of that actually interesting? Thera asked Ben as she peered over his shoulder while he pulled over a dozen different plants from the 2 spatial bags and got to the business of grouping the similar species together for convenience later. Of course it's all interesting, he told her, shocked that it could be considered anything but that, and started pointing out a variety of them. Aside from all the branches the guild wanted that can be used to refresh mana and stamina, these leaves here can be boiled down to clean and treat wounds, and this flower can be processed with a few of these roots to give a minor boost to mana recovery for a short time, not to mention that every part of this one has different minor medical benefits, but if you don't separate them and process each one correctly, all the effects are lost. Okay, your plants are very neat, she said to appease him. What about those ones over there? She asked while pointing to a separate pile from the one he was currently sorting through. Oh, those? Some have uses when applying alchemy to my blacksmithing, the rest are poisons. She was about to pick one up to get a better look, but stopped herself when Ben said that. Why do you need poisons? We'll be in so much trouble if any get mixed in with what we're supposed to be handing over. Which is why I'm separating them out now ahead of time. Besides, it's for my crafting skill. The more branches of it I pursue and try to improve, the more experience I'll get compared to just focusing on one aspect of it, like sticking to blacksmithing. I pretty much ignored its alchemy aspects outside of its use in my smithing too, But if I take some time to learn to refine different potions and poisons, it should be good for my skill overall. Still seems kind of risky to try and make casually though. What if something happens? I work with fire and molten metals on the regular, this is fine. Besides, they're identified as poison because the plant itself is toxic to eat, or they'll harm you if they aren't used in the proper way. He tried to think of the best way to explain it. Let's see, does Sonia have any books on treating anyone afflicted with an animal venom? Thera gave a negative, so he tried to explain the best he could. Okay, imagine something bites you and it causes your blood to thicken. This, he said, grabbing one of the plants from the pile, can act as an anti-clotting agent once it's processed. If you get someone to consume it fast enough after being bitten, then it might be able to slow down the effects of the poison for them to get to a light mage to detoxify their blood. Of course, this will have to be removed too, otherwise they'd stand the risk of bleeding out, but it all comes down to how it's used. You should get Falk to loan you some of his books on alchemy, I'm sure it would help with your knowledge skill. She seemed interested once he started explaining how poisons could be used as medicine depending on the context, so he continued to explain different uses for each one as he sorted them to pass the time, at least until the notification went off in his head. Acquired title, Miracle Maker. All at once he just stopped talking and rested his head in his hand, trying to process what he'd just heard. Myriad, what the hell is this? He muttered to himself, but loud enough for Thera to hear. What weird things happened to your status now? She asked, immediately seeing to the heart of the matter. What makes you think it's something weird with my status, or for that matter that it's weird? He couldn't be sure, but he got the distinct impression she was rolling her eyes under her hood. Please, when something makes you react out of the blue like that, it's almost always about your status, and you have the weirdest one I've ever heard of. How is it you have a bunch of strange and rare skills, but none of the common ones? What makes a skill common? I can't use magic, so you know that's out. Yeah, but look at mine, I have calculate, coordination, and cleaning, 3 skills the majority of people acquire. Aside from the implication you're a mess since you don't have cleaning, how do you keep track of how much mana you use without calculate? Is that what it's for? Later. First, what did you get? Maybe something like poison knowledge? That would make sense given what you were doing, unless it's some other poison skill. It's not a skill, he said while sighing. It's a title. He let that hang in the air, but Thera didn't say anything, just waited while staring at him silently. It's Miracle Maker. I mean, that makes sense. She told him, surprisingly unfazed by it. You heard Ankh right? The world just found out we have some powerful allies now. Kind of reasonable you'd get the title considering the part you played. The part one played was light blackmail on a race that was going to give in and do this eventually. Hey Myriad, come on and speak up, which god gave me this stupid title? It took a few minutes, but Ben's god finally answered him. From what I can tell, it wasn't a god, it was the world, so nobody's at fault. Not that anyone would normally be unhappy to get a title like that if a god could give it. What do you mean it was the world? Ben, all sapient life on the planet is connected through the status system, and the vast majority consider the fact that this close to the invasion date that a world full of allies has appeared to be a miracle. Since you're as much a part of the system as anything else, it knows that you're responsible for it. Really, you should feel lucky. Less than a handful of people in the history of this world would have a title like that. That's a real fancy way of saying that things might get complicated if anyone finds out about this, but okay, do you have any idea what effects it has? He immediately hid the title from his status as he tried to work out what benefits it might include. It was more than a little annoying how vague and undefined they tended to be, but he had to admit that the new one sounded like it would have some decent benefits. Unfortunately, Myriad wasn't any help. Like I said, less than a handful of people have had it and its effects seem vague. Unless you ask someone with a skill that lets them gain knowledge from the system itself, you aren't likely to get an answer for that. I'm fairly certain everyone in the past who had it went on to do great and incredible things, but then again the condition for gaining the title is to have already done something great enough that the majority of the world would consider it a miracle. UHG, Why is the system so vague? Couldn't everything have come with a description so people could actually know how everything worked immediately? Ben, when the gods who designed this system made it, they were fleeing with the remains of their races, his god told him, sounding unusually sharp with his response. They all but invented soul engineering just to give their people as much of a chance to fight back as they could in case the invaders were only a few years away. While effects may not always be clear, they are always beneficial in some way, and more importantly, the system can grow itself without needing new skills to be designed by gods each and every time. Even if it doesn't always seem user-friendly, it's no exaggeration to say it's the greatest gift the sapient races have received from the gods, and should you all survive, provide a brighter future than could ever be achieved without it. Ben was initially shocked by his god's outburst, but understood he'd offended him. I'm sorry, Myriad, I didn't mean anything by it, I just don't like it when I don't understand something, especially when it relates to changes to me. Well, it's not that I don't understand where you're coming from, but remember, if you ever have anything you need to learn, you can ask me. It may take some time, but if there's information on it, I'll find it. The sincerity of his god was touching and caused him to clasp his hands in prayer. Thank you, Myriad, when I need help I'll be sure to ask. After Ben finished talking to his god and letting Thera know about the exchange, he got a bit more information on the calculate skill. When Thera had said it was used to keep track of one's mana, he thought he had initially misunderstood it when he'd first read about it in one of the church books, but it seemed like he had it right the first time. It was simply a skill that improved a person's ability to do mental math quickly. Most people had it at 1 or 2 levels so they could keep track of how much mana they were using in battle or daily life by comparing a known quantity it took to power a spell against their mana pool and regeneration rate. Given his own rather short supply of mana and the fact that he kept running out despite a lack of magic skills to take it up, he figured it wouldn't be a bad idea to try gaining the skill himself, especially since it came down to doing mental math until it was unlocked. He tried exactly that during his watch in the night, only stopping when it was Thera's turn to take over while he got some rest and studied Myriad's blueprints in his divine realm. When the sun rose and he got up, they got to the main task of the day. Having already collected some of the branches yesterday, they kept their eyes out for more, but it wasn't the main goal of the day. They wanted the chance to hunt. In Thera's case, she wanted to attempt to work on her earth magic, and in Ben's he had new tools to test, having spent his spare time during the last week seeing what he could do with his improved skills. Ben set up his tools and traps throughout the area before going with his main strategy for hunting, climbing the tallest tree he could find for safety. Once both himself and Thera were up there, they attempted something riskier than they normally would, only doing it because they felt confident in their current level of growth. They had Thera take off her cloak to see if it would draw anything in. It was something they had spent long hours discussing throughout the days leading up to their first hunt since they came back. It wasn't like the woods were dense with monsters after all. It was significantly more dangerous the further one went, but it was also more than possible to not find anything while out there. They'd been working around this by trying to lure creatures with the smell of cooking meat to begin with, but that took a fair bit of time and patience. They wanted to get quicker results. Of course, that didn't mean they were going to throw away their safety completely. The range of Thera charm would be affected by a few different things, from how much was between her and her target, as well as the target's darkness resistance, but as long as creatures wandered to the edge of it, they were confident they would slowly be drawn in, unable to resist its effects. The main thing then became being vigilant. As long as they got her cloaked again when monsters came within sight, hopefully they would go towards one of the traps Ben had set up that were enchanted with the higher level of charm Ben got from using Sonia's, even if the mana would be significantly weaker since he had to pour his own into power it compared to what naturally radiated from Thera. It took 20 minutes of waiting, but eventually Thera spotted movement rushing towards them and quickly threw her cloak back on, hoping they would keep coming, and even without the constant stimulus of her magic their curiosity and hunger remained, and 2 creatures came through the woods. Ben was pretty sure they were culturefels, large panther-like creatures that were covered in sharp, porcupine-like quills. Still feeling the lingering effects of the charm, they started wandering the area, and each of them started moving towards different traps Ben had set up. The first of the beast walked towards a common pit trap, the kind he'd used in his hunts dozens of times by this point, but now the spikes were enchanted with both charm and drain, hopefully to get the monster more willing to throw itself upon it without needing to go to the trouble of hiding them in some way. Unfortunately, there was no luck on that count. While it did walk up to the pit, it didn't throw itself in it, the draw of the charm apparently not enough to overcome its survival instinct. As for the second one, it made its way towards one of the charm bombs Ben had made and left around. He had produced these ones to be simpler than the ones he'd made for the trial, not worrying about using overly expensive materials for it as he did, but he was confident they would work as long as a creature bit into one. Unfortunately, things didn't work out quite so conveniently. When it reached the first charm bomb, the Coulterfell's immediate reaction was to step on it. He was sure it received a huge shock from suddenly being thrown to the side by the barrier bubble that appeared for a few seconds, but that was all it came down to. It got up again immediately and focused on checking out the other charmed items around. Watching all of this, Ben couldn't help but be disappointed. He had prepared 3 types of traps and the first 2 were already failures. It all came down to the last one. As luck would have it, he had 2 of them set up and they were both approaching them. He had belief in these and was sure he would get them both in one go, but when the first of the creatures encountered his new and improved bear trap and felt thick metal teeth breaking through its needles and piercing its flesh, its scream pulled the other one towards it, leaving the other trap unused. Farah, seeing that it might interfere with his ability to view how successful the first trap was, pulled together an earth bullet, and with careful aim all but destroyed the free creature as the other one continued to struggle. It was no use though, before their eyes it continued to grow weaker and weaker, until all the life had left it, the drain spell on the trap sapping it of everything it had. Having watched it all, Ben could only feel unimpressed by his work. He'd had far too much confidence in his charm bombs, and unless he made dozens of them and carried them around, his bear traps would only be able to capture 1 or 2 creatures at a time as long as the animal's cries didn't scare off anything else with it. As for his improved spike trap, he didn't initially have too much hope for its success from the beginning, but seeing the animal approach it had given Ben an idea. If he could construct a trapdoor with it, something that could cover it to make it less suspicious while being able to reset itself once something fell through, wouldn't that be significantly better? The problem then was creating some sort of trap floor he could carry around with him, but he was sure he'd be able to figure something out if he put his mind to it, and there was plenty of time for that. With both animals dead, Thera took off her cloak again to try and attract more for her own magic practice. They still had hours until they had to go back, all they needed to do was wait. In the 3 hours they'd been there, they'd been able to assemble quite the pile of corpses. A little over a dozen animals had come to be slaughtered, with Thera taking out the majority with her magic, but a few had actually fallen for some of the charm bombs scattered around, and one running towards them so quickly that when it happened to be in front of the pit trap it fell in immediately. Still, as Ben dismantled the corpses he was less than satisfied with the results of his own work and tried to push that aside for the moment while he tried to figure out the pieces of each creature to keep for his personal use, taking them apart one by one. The Coulterfell's quills were a given, Ben already thinking of what fun things he might be able to make with them, but it got harder as he started on the other creatures. Even with the spatial bags, he didn't have nearly enough room for everything and instead had to be more choosy, only taking the densest bones and toughest of the skins for use. When he was done, they would try and find a few more of the branches the guild wanted before heading home. Dismantling level increased. As the weeks passed, Ben fell comfortably into his new routine. From working on his enchanting and connect throughout the week, as well as taking more time to improve his alchemy and some of the tools he'd been designing for his hunts on the weekends, he'd made sure every minute of his time was filled. It had only taken him a few days to get the zeroth level of calculate since he'd been practicing, having plenty of knowledge of math after taking it for years in school and being able to spend all day solving problems, thanks to his extra mind made it rather easy, and he was lightly working on getting the next level for it too. Though it was dull work, it helped keep his thoughts busy most of the time as he did other tasks that were less thought-intensive. Most exciting of all though, tonight should be the night. As long as the Grey, Quillith, kept his word, he should be able to expect a visit sometime later to start submitting some of the questions he'd thought to ask, and Ben had many. One of the worst things about coming to a new world was not having access to the internet at all times. It was hard to realize just how much he'd taken for granted, being able to use the total of human knowledge at any given time. Of course, it was always possible he wouldn't show. Their race as a whole had pretty much instantly gained the world's goodwill the moment they revealed themselves. His little threats that started it all would have pretty much no effect on public opinion, even with his God on his side. If that did end up happening, it wasn't the biggest deal. His biggest concern of trying to help the planet he was stuck on had been fulfilled. Worst to worst, he could travel to one of the bigger craftsman guilds to see if they had any info, though in a few cases he seriously doubted it. Failing that, it all came down to trial and error. "What are you making?" Thera asked as she peered over his shoulder, pulling him from his thoughts and back to his work at hand. "Lifeblood potion, or at least something like it. I had to make a substitution for one ingredient, but Fock thinks it will be fine, so I'm not concerned." "Isn't that the one that will corrode your blood if you make it wrong?" she asked with concern, having taken his suggestion to read through Fock's alchemy books as well and getting to the first level in her knowledge skill. "Yeah, but as long as I make it right, it will replace any lost vitality and can start stitching together flesh at a significantly enhanced rate. Considering how often things try to bite chunks out of me, I want one on hand just in case." He was happy that even without acquiring life magic yet, Thera had started to gain more knowledge on how to treat wounds, but he wanted all assurance he could get in case of emergency. "I'm mostly just concerned you're already making modifications to a dangerous potion that you haven't even made the correct way before. Fock's watching, it'll probably be fine." Thera made a clear and pointed look to the other end of the shop where Fock was busy with his own work, very much not watching Ben make it. "Well, he'll give it a look later. Maybe he's hoping to get out of any more training for any future apprentices," she told him with a laugh. "Haha," he responded dryly. "Weren't you supposed to be studying or practicing magic or something?" At that she sat down and flopped against him. "We don't all have your endless stamina. I needed a day off to do nothing. Gods, I can only wonder how you don't have a permanent migraine from trying to keep your brain busy every day and night," he said. "Don't forget I hang out in Myriad's realm to do some reading. You're actually insane." "I just like being busy, and ever since I got complex mind it's been harder to keep my brain occupied. It can be surprisingly hard to find ways to keep two separate minds engaged. Even if it was a little boring, it actually made it pretty nice to have calculation now that he could practice it in his downtime, or at least as something to do with his other mind when he only needed one, like in conversation, though if he ever got more as it leveled he'd have to think of other things he could do with it. Still, that was a problem for another time. No matter how busy he kept his thoughts, he didn't really feel like he was pushing it to the extent he would get another level out of it, at least not soon. He had thought of a couple ways to change that beyond what already seemed to work, putting himself in so much danger he needed to push beyond his limits to live, but it might be a while before he got the chance to try it out. "Probably for the best if I'm already struggling to keep myself entertained this way," he thought with some mirth. What stopped him from learning calculation before was how boring it had sounded, and now he was training it for lack of anything better to do. Sure, he could try and think of new ideas for things to make, but in that regard he was limited by only having one body. He couldn't make everything, and he could only improve things in a significant way once he had seen how they worked after his first attempt. An example being the potion he'd just finished. When he noticed that it was possible to get all but one of the ingredients for it from the area, he'd immediately started considering alternatives in his spare time and thought he'd figured one out based on the plant's similar characteristics and properties, but he couldn't be sure it would actually work or where he could improve until he tried it out. At least his teacher seemed to agree with his reasoning, but they wouldn't know for sure until it was tested. He walked it over to Fock with Thera in tow and grabbed his teacher's attention before handing it over. Fock looked in the glass and swirled it as he spoke aloud. "Color looks good at least, and the thickness is about right. From what I can tell nothing distasteful's been produced, All it comes down to is what you can't see, its actual medical effect. I'm fairly sure it will be safe, but it'll need to be tested out. Feeling brave, boy? If you don't see anything wrong with it, I should stand by my work, shouldn't I? Good answer, his teacher said with a grin as he handed Ben a knife. In that case, make a nick and try it out. Wait, uncle, that seems crazy, he can't just dash. Thera had tried to argue the idea off, but stopped as Ben dragged the knife across his arm, creating a small cut, and immediately poured a few drops of his potion onto it. Ben! Are you crazy? She yelled at him. I'll probably be fine, he told her, trying to calm her down. The whole blood corrosion is only really a problem if it's consumed orally or if you're somewhere you can't get treated by a healer. If I feel anything wrong, I'll wipe it off and go see Sonia. Why do I even care? She said aloud, mostly asking herself, though Ben answered anyway. Because you're a wonderful fiancé, he told her, trying to be funny. But it feels fine so far. I'm pretty sure things are supposed to start burning immediately if something's wrong. It does kind of itch though. That still sounds bad. Couldn't you have done this at the clinic to be safe? Ben didn't have an answer for that and looked to his teacher for help, who was making a distinct effort not to look at his niece. It was clear that Thera was exasperated. Can you please at least go to the clinic next time you want to test something like that? I'd rather not watch you poison yourself. Will do, he said awkwardly, completely seeing her point. But the good news is the itching seems fine, it looks like a result of my body just rapidly healing. It was slow, but Ben could clearly see a scab starting to form over his cut and couldn't help but marvel that he'd made something that pharmaceutical companies from his world would salivate at. It may have been a fairly complicated potion to make with plenty of room for error, but the fact that not only could it do that, but he was capable of making it left Ben overjoyed. The presence of mana in the world having not just an effect on its residents, but the properties of all life, and meant that with enough training anyone could throw a potion like it together. He wished he could just stick to potions, given how effective they could be and his resistance to healing magics, but they did tend to have their side effects one couldn't avoid, and too much of them at one time would typically be disastrous. Still, now that he could make them, he was going to keep a few around for his hunts from now on top of a basic first aid kit he made sure to buy after having carelessly forgotten one on the trial. It looks good, Falk told his apprentice as he watched the wound close on Ben's arm. It looks like it's a bit slower than it would be if it was made correctly, but that doesn't matter much as long as it doesn't affect the overall performance. I'll have Cecily send out a letter to one of the main guild branches later to see if this is already a known substitute and they can start their own testing to see what races it's compatible with or poisonous to. Since it's just a modification to a recipe anyone can use, there's no patent, but a small reward is offered for discovering new ways to make common medicines, so you might get some luck. Oh sweet. What happened to you being stressed, getting all that money for your braces, that has you already wanting more? Thera asked when she saw his excitement. Hey now, it was just crazy getting all of that at once. Trust me, if I'm paid appropriately for my work, then I'm happy. It wasn't like he would be getting anything close to what he'd made while he was making the braces anyway, and even though that money would last him for many years if he didn't buy anything too crazy for it, there was never any harm in getting a little more. As he, Falk, and Thera stopped to chat before he moved on to his next task, he heard the shop door open behind his back, and a familiar voice call out. "'Excuse me, looking for Ben if he's here?" Ben turned around and locked eyes with the young man who walked into the shop as he charged at Ben before he could say anything, knocking him to the ground. Before either of them could move though, Falk had ripped the man off of him and had a knife that had been hanging on the wall only moments before pressed against his tackler's throat. "Now I ain't sure what issue you have with my apprentice," his teacher growled. "But you better think long and hard before you try anything in my shop." "Wait, Falk!" Ben yelled. "He's a friend, it's all good." At that his teacher let go of someone he hadn't expected to see so soon, his old friend and former classmate Will, who for his part seemed to be doing his best to hide just how frightened he'd been about almost being killed. Before he could speak though, someone else called out to him, and he saw his other friend Steph, who ran up and hugged him, thankfully in a far gentler manner than Will had. "It's so good to see you." "It's good to see you both too," he said as he hugged her back. "But what's going on? I wasn't expecting to see you guys here." Surprised would be putting it mildly. He wished he could have gotten some sort of heads up about their arrival. He would have tried to actually plan something for them. "How could we not see you after what we heard, right, Will?" she asked, turning to him for the first time since she walked in and having missed his encounter with Falk. "Wait, is everything all right?" "Oh yeah," he told her, trying to laugh it off. "Just regretting running ahead, I think." "I'd rather you both stay in the range of my senses," a third voice said, and when Ben looked to see who it was, found another of the world's stranger inhabitants. Trailing behind the other two, at a far more leisurely pace, a giant floating worm entered the shop. It was about 2 meters in length and as thick as a fist, but Ben kept the presence of mind not to stare after his first meeting with Glob, instead just giving a friendly hello. The worm-like person didn't say anything in response, but gave what Ben interpreted as a polite nod before fixing its full attention on Falk. Since they didn't go to the trouble of introducing themselves, Steph did it for them. "Ben, this is my space and time magic teacher Wedro. You could say he's the chaperone of our visit." Perhaps you both dragging us on this detour wasn't so bad after all," Wedro said before turning to address Falk in particular. "Would you happen to be Dash?" "I am, but I'd appreciate it if you didn't go spreading that around so willy-nilly." "Understood. We mostly came to verify your apprentice's sanity, but if you'd be willing, I'd like to commission some items for these two if you'd have time." Falk gave a nod of agreement. If these were not only friends of his apprentice, but also summoned heroes brought to help protect the world, then he could make the time. Ben though had something different in mind. "What do you mean you guys came to check my sanity?" "Don't get me wrong, it's great getting to see you both, but I'm perfectly sane, isn't that right, guys?" he asked, expecting backup from Falk and Thera, but getting nothing but betrayal. "Boy, didn't you somehow grow a whole other mind only a few weeks ago? And I've watched you try and sacrifice your life twice now in only a few months, not to mention every other way you've thrown yourself headfirst into danger." "Alright, I can see I don't have any allies here," he said, defeated. "So why was my sanity such a concern that you guys came all the way out here?" Steph tried to say gently. "We heard you're getting married to the daughter of the current succubus queen." "Yeah, and she's supposed to have some crazy mind-enslaving magic compared to regular succubi." "It sounds nuts, Dash." "Guys," Ben immediately cut in to stop them before they could say anything that would make things any more awkward than they'd just become. He moved beside Thera and put a comforting arm around her shoulders even as he felt her wanting to shrink away. "This would be Thera, my fiancée and also the niece of my teacher. Why don't sit down and talk a bit since I get the impression you didn't receive my letter." Will noticed Falk giving him a death glare and moved closer to Steph, was blushing in embarrassment from accidentally badmouthing someone to their face like that. Thera still seemed like she'd take the first opportunity to walk out she could, and all in all this wasn't how he imagined the touching reunion with his friends would go. He let out a sigh and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Okay, everyone relax for a bit. Since it sounds like you haven't heard, here's what's gone down the last few months." He explained what had happened while he was in Analia, only leaving out a few details such as his creation of the resistance braces and the exact details of the trial, which he couldn't explain if he wanted to, and mostly focused on how Pelania tricked his into publicly proposing in a way that Thera felt compelled to accept. "And I know I didn't outright ever say the species of the friend I made, but I definitely mentioned my resistance to charm. Really feel like you should have put 2 and 2 together. We weren't sure if we could believe that or not after we heard who specifically you were marrying," Steph said awkwardly before she turned to Thera. "I'm so sorry about this. We should have tried talking to Ben without making any assumptions." "Don't worry about it," Thera told her awkwardly, still seeming like she wanted to leave but trying to be polite for Ben's sake, as well as having more than a little curiosity about them herself. "So how did you find out I was engaged if you didn't get my mail yet anyway?" Ben, even with a ridiculous amount of races and nations in the world, that sort of news is still going to travel, Will told him. It wasn't outright confirmed you were a human, but the rumor was going around and your name was attached to it. I'd bet most of our old classmates are aware. Huh, do you think I should expect any more guests anytime soon? Not unless you told anyone but us where to find you. If anyone else was curious enough to check, they'd probably head to Analia. He breathed a small sigh of relief. He wouldn't particularly mind seeing his old classmates if they came to visit, but he sure didn't want to have to repeat this awkward exchange again if he had to. Alright, well with that cleared up, how long are you guys going to be here? It's not a huge town, but let me show you some sights or something. Unfortunately, we just stopped in for the night to check on you, though we did want to ask you if you'd be interested in joining us for a small trip. It would only take about a week if you'd be able to miss that much of your training here? Steph asked, directing the question at Falk, who seemed to give his consent for her to continue. I mean, I only just got back a few weeks ago, I'm not sure I should just be running out again so quickly. What were you going to be doing for a week anyway? This time Will answered, a large grin plastered on his face. We're going demon hunting. Ben laid in bed, exhausted from the events of the day. As great as it was to see his friends after so long, they definitely made a stressful appearance, and that wasn't even considering their request. But really, now I'm going demon hunting with them? That sounds exhausting. His last couple months had felt like constant danger and near-death experiences, and now his friends had come along and wanted him to face more, even worse given it seemed he wouldn't have a choice. As soon as Will said the words, Falk took over the decision-making for him and essentially forced Ben into it. Demons make great materials no matter how dangerous they might be, and I told you when you started I expect you to hunt your own materials. Sometimes that means pushing yourself, his teacher had told him as he'd been forced into it, while at the same time making a deal with Wedrow. I'll give you a good deal on whatever you need for those two on two conditions. I want the boy to be working on getting a couple of skills anyway, and my niece could use some experience with a demon hunt too. What do you say? The flying worm agreed surprisingly easily, and with that, the deal was done. And now I need to work on getting those two skills too. It felt like ages ago now, but when he'd been making a temporary cloak for Thera he'd asked Falk before he left about skills he should try and get, and it seemed like despite the advances he'd made since then, especially considering what he'd discovered about his connect and enchanting, his teacher had focused in on two that could be good for his crafting, meaning that while Thera, Will, and Steph hunted demons, Ben would be off to the side killing this world's equivalent of rats and squirrels. To try and get the knife wielder and hammer wielder skills. He understood where his teacher had been coming from at least. While crafting and all other production-related skills came with tool proficiency as part of its package, that didn't mean he shouldn't try to increase it more. The issue was how he'd have to go about it. Hammer and knife wielder were both combat skills, meaning he could only gain them by fighting with those weapons. Once acquired, they could level up through regular use of the weapon for other tasks, though much slower, and the added proficiency with the weapons would increase his ability to use them as tools for other things like blacksmithing and woodcarving. The main issue was just that he didn't have any interest in the act of acquiring them. He knew they would be useful and that they made sense to get, but up until now his preferred method to hunt had been from a distance, and if he was being honest with himself he didn't remotely care about the combat aspects of them. Perhaps it would be a different story if he'd come to this world with awoken and blessed versions of the skills, but that just came down to him wanting the strength without the effort. If he had to choose between going out and hunting to raise those skill levels or hunting to test some tools he'd crafted, he'd take testing any day of the week. Well, it's to help me improve my crafting overall, so as long as I get the skills before the week is done it won't be too bad, at least level 0 skills aren't too challenging. If he couldn't get them in that time, he'd just have to try and construct some traps that would be able to capture some monsters without finishing them off so he could quickly do it himself. As fun as it is waiting for you to notice you're not alone, things have been pretty busy since our little announcement, so if you don't mind let's get this going. A familiar voice came from beside him, Ben seeing Quillith when he looked. I wasn't sure you'd show. A deal is a deal. Besides, this is the easy part. True. As per what they had decided when they first met, Ben would only be asking questions right now. The alien wouldn't come back until the next month with answers for him and to take new questions. It felt long in some ways, but it also created more than enough time to think over exactly what he wanted to learn, as well as plenty of time for the Grey to gather the information he needed without impeding its own work too much. In that case, there's 3 things I want to learn more about. Modern weapon technology, how something like a walkie-talkie is made, and how showers work. The Grey was unfazed for the first 2, but the last one provoked a look. One of those was not like the others. I'm not a fan of only being able to wash with a bucket of water or a bath if I'm lucky, he said with a shrug. Plus, showering just feels good. I guess we can change the request to plumbing in general, with an emphasis on showers. Very well, that one shouldn't be an issue, but may I make you a recommendation for the other 2? Sure, let's hear it. Rather than get the information we know about both in the next month, wait until the various nations of this world finish conducting their own research and then we can provide it to you. Ben thought for a moment. Of course, those 2 topics would be some of the first that the world wanted to learn too. As far as he knew, fast long-distances messages could only be created by exceptionally skilled space and air mages, with both options having drawbacks that made them impractical to all but the wealthy and powerful. As for weapons, based on what he knew, a powerful enough mage could cause as much damage as many of the more common ones available on Earth, some potentially reaching the strength of military-grade weapons, so he hadn't initially considered they would be looking to get them, but it made sense. After all, wouldn't the common person benefit from having something that was easy to use with a low skill level in the event the fighting made it to any residential areas? That wasn't to mention nukes or whatever weird sci-fi weapons these aliens might have at their disposal. Of course the governments of the world would want access. Alright, sounds good to me, he decided. How long do you think it will take to work some of that stuff out? It's going to depend on multiple factors. We're currently trying to compare the physics of this reality to any of the others we're aware of, but unfortunately ones like this with rules that allow the sentients within to have so much power in reshaping it as they see fit tend to be messy. On top of that, we can't conduct the tests ourselves, instead needing to get each nation or kingdom to follow our directions. It could be a few months at best, maybe longer. Well, hopefully I have years, so I guess it's not the biggest deal. Though speaking of, any news on the invaders? At this, the Grey's facial expression shifted in a way Ben interpreted as displeasure. We've checked the homeworlds of each of this planet's inhabitants, and suffice to say the situation isn't ideal. Frankly, you're all going to lose, though you probably shouldn't spread that around. Ben felt a knot forming in the pit of his stomach. That bad? Whatever you're thinking, it's worse. These creatures not only have taken over hundreds of worlds, in the hundreds and thousands of years since each has been conquered, they've managed to fill them up. Our scientists are trying to model what their reproduction rate is like as we observe them, but should you all manage to survive the first 3 waves, we see no reason for them to stop. Frankly, if they didn't insist on doing things in such a way they could take off and kill off its inhabitants in a few hours at most, and if you managed to free a single world from them, they could likely have it filled up again in just a few years. Delightful, he said, wishing he hadn't asked. Surprisingly though, Quillith seemed to try and lift his spirit. We're working on it, the alien told him confidently. All of their worlds are connected through gates, the same sort you lot use to travel country to country, but on a much larger scale. Our scientists are working on figuring out ways to disrupt gate travel so we can keep them completely off-world. It's the only hope we can think of at the moment, but it's something. So what's your take on all of that? Ben asked when he awoke in his god's realm shortly after Quillith left. Not ideal, but not shocking either. We'd believed that the invasions were for colonization purposes, and their quick reproduction rate is something we're at least familiar with thanks to all of the demons that have made it onto this world and still exist despite frequent hunts for them. It only takes a few to fall between the cracks, and before you know it you've got a new batch of demons fresh and ready to go. Great, anything else I should know about them before I get dragged off to face them tomorrow? Don't sound so pessimistic, It seems like your friends are going to manage all of the fighting, and it wouldn't be a bad idea for you to get to see what's to come, even if it's on a small scale. Yeah, I'm sure it won't be too bad. It's just a bit quick. I want to focus on developing my skills and getting job levels if I can. Well, work on your connect more since raising it should give you some job experience. It just so happened I had a surprise for you coming this week that should be able to help, but I guess you won't be able to enjoy it until you're back. Wait, what? Ben asked, completely taken off guard. I'll look forward to it then, but why? Even he had to admit he wasn't a great apostle. With everything his God had already given him, he couldn't ask for more, at least not without putting in some work for it. Myriad felt some small joy hearing the feeling cross Ben's mind but gave a brief explanation to provide context. No need to feel too grateful about this, it will help the apostle of another God as well, you'll just be able to get plenty of benefit out of it too. I'll leave the details for when you're back. Or you could tell me now? Surprises can be fun, the God said, brushing him off. And more motivation for you to make it back safely. Ben was sitting out at the front of Fox's shop, waiting for everyone else to arrive. They had agreed to meet up there early in the morning before heading off, but he still got there hours before anyone else would to try and get a few things done while he could. He'd already packed everything he thought he would need just the night before, many of which were the same things he'd packed for the trial. He had his jacket, his barrier gauntlet, sleeping rolls for both himself and Thera, as well as a couple staves packed away for her. The main difference was the presence of a first aid kit, as well as a proper tent to sleep in. Though his friend Steph had an advanced form of life magic, he wasn't going to take any chances with his safety again, even if it might seem like overkill. Finally, on top of a hammer and a knife, Ben made sure to bring a charm-enchanted bear trap he'd made in the early hours of the morning. Usually, he'd make them so that it would require a sufficient weight to set them off, but he'd lowered that threshold considerably with these ones as well as reducing its crushing force. It wasn't for use against any demons they might encounter though, as Will and Steph were going out to get experience for fighting them in the future. He couldn't go lowering the challenge for them by capturing it, they needed the full experience. No, the trap was for his own training. He didn't want to go to the effort of fighting whatever small animal he needed to in a fair situation, he wasn't a warrior and that seemed like a fast way to getting himself injured. He would get the hammer and knife wielder skills as safely as he could to improve his crafting and then be done with them. As he was inspecting the hammer and knife he would be using for weapons in front of the shop, Thera was the first to show up. Did you get everything you needed done? She asked him as she arrived. Yeah, it was all pretty quick. How about you, feeling ready for the day? For all I've heard about demons, this will be my first time seeing one. Honestly, I'm a little worried about how things will go, she said, seeming a bit off. It doesn't sound like there will be many, and even if you, Will, and Steph struggle then there's still Wedro, so it'll probably be fine, unless there's something else you're worried about? He asked, having a decent idea of what was actually bothering her. Demons after all were just another monster to hunt, at least while they existed in such low numbers on the world. Interpersonal relations were a whole other matter. I guess I'm just worried about how the week will go is all, she told him. You're the only one I've had any luck hunting with. I understand why Uncle wants me to have this opportunity, I just think it's going to be awkward. It might, he conceded. Sorry my friends didn't make the best impression, I'll try and keep things positive while we're out there. It's alright, it's not like I don't understand why they were worried about you. Besides, I've dealt with this plenty in the past. I can handle a bad week if it happens, and I don't want to get in the way of friends you haven't seen in so long. He reached out and took her hand. Well, don't forget you're my friend too. I don't think there'll be any problems since I explained things to them, but if there is I'll set them straight, don't worry. We interrupting something? Will yelled out to him as he, Steph, and Wedro arrived at the shop. Just chatting while we wait, he called back, dropping Thera's hand as he did. Despite the fact that the worm-like Wedro didn't seem to have eyes, he appeared to be looking at them all appraisingly. All of you just remember this is a training exercise to prepare for the coming war. I don't intend to put up with whatever mating behavior your species participates in. I already told you our engagement is a sham, you don't need to worry about anything like that, Ben told the giant worm, who still seemed to give off a lack of faith as he floated in front of him. Anyway, since you're Steph's spatial magic teacher, are you going to whisk us away to our destination, or should I expect something a bit less magical? You're partially correct, Wedro told them. My young apprentice will be taking the lead for now, to get practice with her magic. When she tires out, I'll take over. Now if you're all ready? Actually, there's one thing I have for you all first, Ben told them, holding off their departure to give them each an amulet, or at least trying to. When he got to Wedro, he was a bit unsure what to do as the worm didn't have hands of his own, but he also didn't want to just put it on him without permission. Seeing Ben hesitate though, he took the matter into his own proverbial hands, and before Ben could react used his magic to teleport it around his neck. The act caught him off guard, but as everyone else seemed to be looking at their own curiously, he explained just what they'd received. They're resistance amulets that should cover the death and darkness affinities. I've heard that demons tend to have the death attribute, so hopefully this will provide some protection, and the dark resistance is so you guys will be fine if Thera uses a trick we've been doing for our hunts. This way, they would all be a little safer from any potential demon attacks, while at the same time hopefully being less wary of Thera's charm too. Luckily for him, making a resistance amulet was easier than one of his resistance braces, and they could be made with a one-size-fits-all approach as opposed to the braces that seemed to lose effectiveness if someone other than the person they were made for wore it. The biggest difficulty was putting two resistances on the same one, but he was still able to manage. While Thera didn't really need the dark resistance, given how high her own was, he had just made hers the same as everyone else for the time being. If she wanted a different resistance placed on it, he could always remove the current enchantment and replace it later. Though everyone else seemed grateful as they inspected their gifts, Wedro came off as indifferent to it. I thank you I suppose, but wasting your time on something like this wasn't needed. Ah, sorry. Did you already have high resistances to those affinities? No, but there's no point in wasting the effort to make something that would provide such a minor difference in battle. If you're a craftsman, wouldn't it be better to make armors instead? I mean, I wouldn't say that. Sure, armor is probably better overall, but don't knock my amulets. Weakening a spell's effects by about 30% for dark and death magic is nothing to turn your nose up at. I'm sorry, by how much? The worm asked, completely taken aback by the numbers told. Roughly 30% for each. Dark is slightly higher than death, but you shouldn't notice a difference. In that case I must apologize, Wedro said while bowing his head. I did not realize you had an awakened enchanting skill. He had been informed that the boy in front of him came to the world with skills only at the first tier, but he was sure that must have been a mistake when he heard the details of the amulets, at least until Ben corrected him. Oh no, I'm just level 4 in enchanting, he said, waving him off and trying to ignore any bubbling feelings about his own inferior skills. Since it's blessed though, I can enchant with 15% of my resistance for every level, lets me get it pretty high. Wait, you're already at level 4? Steph yelled. Didn't you only get level 1 when you got here? No need to remind me. I think what she's saying, will cut in, is that it's incredible for you to have gotten 3 levels in just the year we've been here. Neither of us have been able to raise our blessed skills at all. Maybe, but yours are already awakened, of course it would be harder for you, Ben countered. If you guys gained levels as easily as someone at the beginning of their skill, I would be yelling out at the injustice of the world. While they talked, Wedro ignored them to focus on his own thoughts. Along with the rumor Steph and Will had heard about Ben's engagement, there was also another one coming from Analia. Supposedly a genius enchanter of an unknown race had discovered a new way of suppressing passive magics. When he'd seen who the boy's teacher was, he'd assumed it had been him, but now Wedro would have to begin to adjust that evaluation. With gifts given, their travels began. Steph stretched out a hand, and with an effort of mana and will tore a hole through space, which they all quickly walked through. No sooner than the last person stepped across its boundary was it closed and another opened, followed by another, and another. It was like she was making miniature versions of the gates that constantly ran to allow travel between countries, and Ben couldn't help but marvel at her magic as she went. To completely erase the distance between two places was something he would never achieve through his own power like that. Sure, he might be able to create a tool with similar properties if he worked hard enough and could get access to the magic, but it would never truly be his, something he could work on and grow through his own efforts. When that train of thought came to him, he did his best to abandon it. There was nothing he could do about his incompatibility with magic, no use being jealous of the people he cared about, so instead he tried to turn his attention to the scenery as they passed it. The very first gate brought them out of town, and with each one that followed they got deeper and deeper into the woods, though at the 10th Steph had to stop. That was incredible. He could help but tell her. How have you gotten so cool since I last saw you? Thanks, but it's not that good. It's really not, her teacher agreed, sounding disappointed. The range you sense ahead is still far too weak. Each jump brought us what, a few hundred meters? I'm sorry Wedro, she said, giving her teacher a bow. If you take over, I'll start practicing my spatial perception more as we go. The worm gave her a silent look for a moment before turning away and opening a gate himself, and when stepping through Ben immediately felt a difference. He wasn't sure how far they'd gone, but the woods felt so much deeper compared to every single jump from Steph that the gap between student and teacher became immediately apparent. How much farther did we get with that one? He couldn't help asking, curiosity getting the better of him. Luckily for him the worm seemed willing to answer. Without being aware of my destination ahead of time, I can manage a jump of about 10 kilometers. I'll take us through another 20 gates, and from there we'll take a break to rest and regain our mana. Over 200 kilometers of travel in a span of less than an hour. It was shocking to put it mildly, the kind of power those with awakened skills could access, and Ben briefly wondered if any were worshipped as gods for their strength before dismissing the thought. In a world with real gods, I doubt they'd be too happy about a mortal taking any valuable faith. They continued on from gate to gate as they were produced, watching as the woods between each grew darker and denser until they finally had to stop for Wedro to regain his mana. Steph seemed at the end of hers as well, having continued to practice her spatial perception even after exhausting herself while opening the first round of gates, so the moment Wedro stopped she let herself collapse to the ground with Will quickly running to her side. Will, she'll be fine. Leave her and ensure our immediate area is safe. He took a look between Steph and her teacher before doing as he was told and quickly running off to explore the surrounding woods. It was times like these Ben's lack of combat and magic skills actually proved to be an asset. With no expectations of him, he went to take a seat beside Steph, and seeing Thera unsure of what to do gestured for her to come down beside him. That really was incredible, Steph. I can't believe you've gotten so good with your magic in the past year. Not too incredible. Me and Will have spent basically that whole time getting acquainted with how to use all of the abilities that anyone who worked their way to our level would already have mastered. Plus, even if I can use all the spells, I still haven't mastered them. Practice is something you can't escape, he teased. Speaking of, since we're having a break, mind if I do a little myself? He held out a hand to her and she took it, aware of the skill he'd gained in some of his past letters and more than a little curious about just what it was like. When the connection was made, she was immediately aware of two things. How controlled Ben kept his thoughts, at least when he was connected with someone, and how little control she had of her own. Maybe it was the knowledge that she didn't want her every little secret to come to mind that made things she'd much rather keep to herself cross her thoughts in rapid succession, and the knowledge that she'd need to suppress them only made it worse. Ben saw enough that he had a variety of questions he wanted to ask not only her, but Will especially, but decided to respect their privacy until they felt ready to tell him and instead focused on something he could tell she wanted to talk about. So you're worried about how Thera feels about what you said yesterday? He thought to her with enough force to strip away her growing panic and making her concentrate on the conversation at hand. Yes. I just feel really bad about it. We just came here with all of these worries and said all that right in front of her, and now that I know you weren't forced into it, I don't want to be mean to your fiancé. Well, I'm flattered that you think I'm such a catch that a princess would resort to charming me to have me, but don't worry too much. Thera feels awkward, but if you put in some effort I'm sure you could get along. Oh, but don't mention the princess thing, she doesn't like that. Or the fiancé thing, she's pretty uncomfortable with that too. Can't you help a bit more than that? She thought at him while staring at him with big embarrassed eyes. Ben could only sigh and turn to Thera, beside him. Mind helping me with my practice too? I haven't tried to connect to two people at once yet, it might be a good experience for me. She seemed more hesitant than usual before taking his hand, but when she did he immediately tried to use hidden mind to separate them from each other while leaving one of his own minds with each of them. He wanted to use this as a chance to talk to Thera in private first to see where her head was at before he tried smoothing things over, especially when the first things he felt from her were discomfort and jealousy. Discomfort he understood. She was going to have to interact with people for the next week that she was already sure had a bad impression of her, but the jealousy was a bit harder to pin down. Maybe she was worried about him having other friends around now, but he couldn't be sure, so instead he went to the direct approach. Want to talk about it? You know, I hate that you can tell my mood so easily when we do this when I can feel less and less from you each time. Benefits of practicing your mental control. He thought, a smile forming on his face. But I'm fine, it's you I'm worried about, talk to me. There's nothing more to say, I already told you I was going to feel awkward with this, but I'll deal with it for the week. That's the discomfort, but I'm also picking up hints of jealousy. The moment he expressed the thought her mind turned flush with embarrassment. You don't have to worry about losing me to them if that's what it is. And from embarrassment, quickly, to exasperation. That's not it, so don't worry. I will, try to figure out how to get your friends to have a better opinion of me. I'm glad to hear it. You know, Steph wants the same thing as well, I think the best thing for both of you would be an open and honest exchange of feelings. As the thought passed through his mind his grip tightened on each girl's hand so they couldn't attempt to escape from his next move, and he immediately changed the way hidden mind was set up, dropping the barrier he'd put up between the two of them and instead separating his own minds from theirs, leaving them alone to interact as he watched over their thoughts. Hidden mind level increased. What exactly happened here? Will asked when he returned and found Steph using her healing magic on Ben while Thera and Wedro watched from the side. Oh, just seems like some people aren't big fans on how I solve conflict, he told his friend with a chuckle as he rubbed his bruised head. They had only been left connected through him for a few minutes before Steph seemed to get overwhelmed by not being able to properly control all of the thoughts and feelings leaking out of her mind and gave him a solid whack to the head to escape. Considering just how much more powerful than him she was when she came to this world, it was far from a light blow and left Ben seeing stars, but at least her honest emotions had been transmitted to Thera, who seemed to have reacted in a way he never would have expected. She was feeling shy. Ignore it, he's just being punished for his choices. More importantly, did you find anything in the immediate area? Wedro asked. Nothing worth worrying about. A few smaller creatures I couldn't identify, but as long as they weren't poisonous I don't think there'll be any issues. If that's the case, then it's the perfect time to start fulfilling my agreement with the smith. Will, take your friend nearby and start letting him practice his weapon skills while we let our mana recharge. I assume you can keep him safe in the event anything goes wrong? Of course, you can count on me. Come over this way, Ben, there are plenty of creatures around that should be alright for a beginner. With a sigh he got up and followed his friend, resolving himself to spend a long week working on getting the few skills he would need to give his crafting some extra oomph. They didn't go very far, maybe 5 minutes of walking at most, before we'll stop them. Alright, you'll find a bunch of small creatures ahead in the bushes, around 10 of them. How do you want to handle it? Ben appraised his friend for a minute before pulling out his small bear trap and pouring his mana into it to power the charm it had been enchanted with before quietly backing off and waiting. Hopefully something will come out and activate the trap, but how do you know there was anything there? You're not the only one who learned some skills. I learned tracking and life sense since I started my training, using them together makes hunting a breeze. Jealous, Ben could potentially learn tracking, but life sense was a skill that relied on having a decent life affinity, meaning it wasn't in the cards for him. Of course, that didn't mean he couldn't take a copy of it to enchant with later. Did you learn any other cool skills since I've seen you last? Wait and see, was what he got back with a wink. Even if I haven't leveled anything, I've learned as much as you have. I've picked up a trick or two. Anyway, it looks like your trap's about to catch its first victim. He couldn't help but be curious about how his friend had grown in the time since he'd seen him, but put the conversation on hold for now in favor of waiting for a creature that had left the bushes to explore the device as it was lured over. Thankfully, they didn't have to wait long, and in only a few minutes he was able to identify a familiar foe. A squirrel, its 3 beady eyes and razor-like teeth catching the faint light that made its way between the trees and left them sparkling as it approached the trap. Of all the animals Ben could hunt for his skill, he was happy to get this one. He'd harbored a bit of a personal grudge against them since one bit a chunk out of his leg a few months back. Even if he and Thera had ended up hunting dozens of them since, he didn't think he'd be feeling too bad about it. With a quick snap, the trap closed around it after it got a little too close, and with that Ben came out of hiding with Will in tow. He'd used his dismantling enough times on the creatures to feel confident when taking them apart that he knew exactly where to cut for the best results and to give the creature a quick death. It saw them approach, and despite managing to get 2 legs caught in it, the trap thrashed around as it tried to escape, not wanting the 2 of them any closer. Seeing it was enough to make Ben feel more than a little unpleasant despite himself. He had always kept a distance from the things he'd hunted, either through his traps or Thera's magic. Now that he was right in front of it, he couldn't escape the fact that he'd be killing it with his own 2 hands. But that was the reality of the world he now lived in, and not letting himself hesitate any longer pulled the knife across the creature's throat in one swift movement. Only a few moments after, the life left it. Ben looked down on it and evaluated how he'd done it. Even if he made its suffering reasonably short, it still must have been in pain for longer than it needed to, a fact that didn't sit well with him. God, look at me getting sentimental. It's not like my pit traps wouldn't be a million times worse, and I use them all the time. He thought to himself, annoyed he was feeling this way just by reducing the distance between him and his kill. Still, I'll try going under the jaw next time so it will be quicker. All that's left is to drain the blood and pack it away to dismantle later. Since their meat wasn't good to eat, this step wasn't as important, but he didn't want to fill his bag with blood if he could help it, so with that in mind, he found a couple strong vines to tie around the body and hung it from a tree. You were good at that, Will complimented as he worked. Sure you don't already have a knife skill? I have dismantling, which gives me a pretty good idea on how to take an animal apart, so that helped, and my crafting gives me a certain level of knife proficiency. Hopefully, both facts will work in my favor. It couldn't hurt, but on a different note, are you planning on using your trap each time? It seems like some of the other squirrels around heard that one panic and are hesitating to come out, especially with us here. Do you have a better idea in mind? Of course, his friend said with a grin, before he walked out into the bushes, reached down, and pulled another out. Ben watched it struggle, while calling out a warning to his friend. You don't want to be on the receiving end of those teeth, trust me, it sucks. Don't tell me you've already forgotten the skills I came here with, man, he yelled back as a squirrel tried to chew on his arm. Tried being the operative word. No matter what the creature attempted, it couldn't make its way through Will's flesh, making Ben remember one of the skills his friend had told him about when they first came to the world, tough skin. Seeing that his friend was fine, Ben walked over and stabbed under the creature's jaw to get to its brain, killing it instantly. So what do you think? Will asked. You deal with the bodies however you need to, and I'll go grab us the next one? Sure, sounds good to me. He took the corpse and started preparing to let gravity do the work of bleeding it while Will went for another one. It felt like it was going to be a messy day. Acquired skill knife wielder level 0. Oh, thank God. You got it? Will asked after hearing his friend's outburst. Yeah. I guess it ended up being quicker than I thought, but I really would rather avoid hours of throat slitting and stabbing again in the future. That felt like the sort of thing that would get a guy a few years of court-ordered therapy on Earth. Probably, but gotta accept the world we're in. It had probably only been 2 or 3 hours, but in that time Will caught a variety of small monsters for Ben, who then used the knowledge that came from dismantling to kill them in the most efficient way possible. He could only hunt like that because Will was there to capture them and hold them down, but it had paid off and now he only needed to worry about getting the hammer wielder skill. On the other hand, they now had the issue of having almost 100 animal corpses to deal with. Ben had been proactive and started the process of draining them all as Will found them, but there was far more than he could fit into his spatial bags. He was going to have to choose what to keep of it all. What a waste, he said aloud as he looked at the pile of death he was responsible for. Feeling bad about all of that? Maybe a little, but mostly about the fact that I won't be able to take it all back with me. If I'm going to kill all that, I should at least put it to use. Then get Steph or Wedro to help you, Will told him, and seeing Ben's confusion went on to explain. They each have spatial magic, so instead of using a spatial bag like yours, they can create their own storage spaces around them. Why did you think we didn't have any supplies on us? Ben hadn't actually given the matter any thought, but it made sense. If the spell on his bag was a space affinity 1, then of course anyone with an awakened space magic would be able to do that much. Oh sweet, in that case give me a hand carrying them back, now that he knew he would need help to deal with all of them after all, and immediately started loading his own arms while watching as Will did the same. There was a clear difference in what they could each carry. Even with the strength he'd gained working at the forge, he still fell short of the strength his friends came with to the planet. God, I wish I could work on improving my stats a bit more, he lamented. The bonuses I got for my last job are pretty weak, at the very least they weren't in areas Ben cared too much on improving. The intelligence bonus was nice, but he got that from his other jobs too, and even if he was supposedly getting bonuses for his vitality recovery and mana recovery, he wasn't seeing much growth there at all. Well, maybe you'll make some progress towards it after all this, Will said, trying to cheer him up. Not likely, I don't have any combat job options. Currently, I'm just your friendly local priest. Well yeah, all this isn't going to do anything for you, we are hunting demons. So? He asked, not understanding what his friend was getting at as Will's eyes widened in comprehension. Ben, you do know killing demons gives experience to all jobs, right? Wait, what? Explain. There were still too many gaps in his knowledge of the world, and this was clearly one that needed to be filled as fast as possible. It's just how the system is set up, Will told him, trying to calm down his friend while leading them both back to camp. Think about it, when the gods made it they wanted a system to help the people in it grow, but the main point was so they could survive the future invasion. When the war comes, if all the soldiers and other combatants are wiped out, then everyday people will be forced to fight, but if a person is halfway through their job it would be a nightmare to have to give up the bonuses on it by changing it, so instead all of them can get experience killing invaders and demons. That way everyone can move on to their new jobs worry-free. Well, minus the fact that they're all probably going to die if things get that bad anyway. Wait, but that means... Damn it, I should have brought all of my traps. He was cursing himself for coming unprepared, but there was nothing he could do. Either that piece of information had been kept from him or everyone assumed he would just know, either way he just needed to figure out what to do for it now. All he had was some magic rings, his barrier gauntlet, a trap for small and weak animals, and now about 100 corpses. Even if he wanted to try and score some of that experience for himself, his options were limited. Well, I'll see if there's anything I can come up with anyway, but this really is training for Will and Steph. I probably shouldn't go stealing any of their kills when they'll actually be fighting on the front lines. With a regret-filled sigh, he got back to where the others were waiting. You guys mind storing these for Ben? Will asked Steph and Wedro. We got a lot, and he doesn't want them to go to waste. Since Steph still isn't comfortable enough with her time magic to delay rot, I'll look after them, Wedro told them, surprisingly agreeably. There's nothing worse than discovering your storage is filled with spoiled goods, especially if your race is particularly susceptible to strong odors. Cool, in that case I'll start running them back here. Ben, you can wait here and get some rest with everyone. I'm not going to make you carry all of that alone. It will only be a couple trips. Besides, you should fiddle around with how the new skill feels now that you got it. He wanted to argue, but ultimately just shrugged. Well, if you're up for doing all the work, I guess I won't fight you. Thanks though. With a smile and a nod, his friend ran off far faster than Ben could ever manage as the corpses he left disappeared, taken into Wedrow's storage. That left Ben with nothing to do but see if the knife wielder skill made any noticeable improvements to his crafting. He found a thick fallen branch and began carving into it, using his crafting to make the material easier to work and the same knife he'd been hunting with to shape it into his desired form, in this case a raccoon. It only took a few moments to feel a small, but not insignificant improvement to his ability to use the tool. It was like it moved more naturally in his hand, almost becoming an extension of himself in some ways, and he immediately understood why his teacher wanted him to get it. If he could already feel a difference for his woodworking as a whole just by getting one level 0 skill, then how much better would he be at the forge once he got hammer wielder? Both his fantasies for the future as well as his carving ended up being interrupted though, by a face coming beside his own to look at what he was doing. You're not going to be able to see much of a difference from my usual work if that's what you're curious about, but it's definitely there, he told Thera. I guess I don't have much of an eye for that sort of thing. Does it feel any different? Enough to make some impact, and every little bit helps. Any luck with your own training? At that she slumped against him. No. I even tried to ask your friend if she had any advice on it since she has an awakened version of the skill, but she wasn't able to help. While Steph did come to the world with it, I doubt she would know where to start to actually acquire the skill. That's pretty much what she said, she sighed. And I can't believe you got your skill while I'm out here struggling. Where's some sympathy? You'll get it eventually, don't worry. Besides, I think there's a world of difference between learning a combat skill for a tool I already know how to use compared to learning how to feel a whole new type of mana. Yeah, but it still sucks being stuck trying to feel the mana without knowing what it's like. If the spirits don't come through for me, I don't know how I'll. Wait, an idea popped into her head and she grabbed Ben's arm and started pulling her toward Steph, much to his surprise. Hey, basic knife safety means not pulling someone in the middle of carving. What if I cut myself? That might be pretty convenient actually. What? She ignored his protests and instead addressed Steph. I'm sorry to ask you this, but would you be willing to let Ben connect us again? Steph for her part was caught off guard, focusing on relaxing and replenishing her mana after all the spells she'd used earlier. She certainly wasn't expecting a request like that. I'm not too sure about that, she said apologetically. I don't really like the feeling of completely burying myself like that. Oh, alright, Thera said, sounding crestfallen. I guess that was a bit much to ask. Thera, why don't you explain why you want to before giving up so fast, Ben told his friend, curious about what her goal was himself. I was just thinking that if I could feel her use her life magic while connected to you, then it might help me feel the life mana within myself, but I can just wait to see if the spirits can help me out whenever they get to Stonewall. After all, you didn't exactly make that a fun experience for anyone, she told him, a hint of accusation in her voice. Hey now, I think things are less awkward between you both now, since you were willing to ask, so I'm calling it a win. Anyway, Steph, what do you think? A look of uncertainty filled her eyes, but it seemed like her desire to make up for how she'd first treated Thera won out. Okay, I'll do it, but I need an injury to treat. That won't be a problem, Thera told her before she turned to Ben with a look of silent expectations. What? I mean, you're the one that insists on calling me your beautiful fiancé. Just think of this as your husbandly duties. If you think bleeding for you is a husbandly duty, then I want a divorce. Should have thought of that before scamming all those magic materials from my parents. Now come on and stop being a baby, I'll make it up to you later. Fine. He wiped down his knife, making sure to clean it well after the day it had seen, before making a long cut along his forearm and connecting with them both. Considering some of the injuries he'd gotten since he first arrived in the world, it wasn't too bad, and his knife was sharp so the cut was clean, but it was still a bit unpleasant. Steph was able to pick up on his feelings just before he put up Hidden Mind and started healing him immediately. Her healing was faster than Sonia's at least, but based on the speed his wound closed, he got the impression Steph still wasn't as competent with the skill as she could be. Awoken skills were supposed to be on a whole other level after all. He didn't think his resistance to the magic should be slowing her spell down this much. Still, after just a minute it was done and Ben was healed, though Thera still didn't seem satisfied. That was pretty quick. Do you think we could do it again? Not super into the idea of dying of blood loss out here, he told her, trying to dissuade her from the idea. Unfortunately, Steph came to her aid. I can speed up the regeneration of your blood so you'll be fine. The connection isn't too bad if I have something to focus on, so I don't mind. Traitor. Please Ben, Thera said, trying to appeal to him. I don't know if I'll get the chance to be able to try this with someone with an awakened skill again, and there's no guarantee trying it with the life spirits will actually work. He looked at her for a moment before giving in. Oh fine, I guess it will be nice if you have the skill in case of an emergency, so it's not a bad price to pay, but you owe me one, and I'm definitely going to collect. Maybe I'll practice connecting with her for a solid day. The only one I can get to do it for that long is Frederick or some other plant. As he thought on that and other possibilities, he made a longer, deeper cut into his arm, hoping this would be the end of it, otherwise it could be a very long week indeed. Is this what it's going to be like every time I leave for a bit? Will asked after he finished delivering all of Ben's kills to Wedrow, only to find he was being healed again and his arm was covered in blood. Never get engaged, Will. Sure, things may seem nice at first, but before you know it, they're asking you to bleed just so they can test their skills on you. The whole thing is a scam. Pretty sure that's just you, buddy. And we agreed to finish when he came back anyway, Thera said in her defense, before turning to Steph and giving her a small nod of gratitude. I think I was able to get a fair bit from that, thank you. No problem, I'm going to focus on regaining my mana a bit more, but if you need anything else just let me know. At that, Thera and Steph both left to sit by themselves, Steph to relax and Thera to practice and reflect on what she'd just felt from the connection. Ben was planning on going back to his carving, but Will was still standing above him, looking like he wanted to ask something. What's up, man? I was just curious about that mind skill of yours, wanted to see if you'd use it on me. Connect? He asked, getting a nod in response. Sure, but any particular reason? Just curious. He didn't know why, but something about Will's attitude made it so he couldn't completely believe that, but there was also no harm. Any chance to practice one of his main skills was valuable after all, and he didn't intend to pass it up. He held out his hand and when Will took it he connected. Surprisingly, Will's mind seemed unusually disciplined, even more so than Thera's, who at this point had plenty of experience trying to keep her thoughts under control. There were a few thoughts and feelings leaking from his friend, but he wasn't letting everything out like Steph. However, he was unintentionally letting Ben be completely aware of the main thing he wanted to talk about. Hey Ben, so I was hoping to have the chance to talk to you about this earlier, but seeing as how you already... Wait. He stopped his train of thought for a minute and looked around to confirm something. Sorry, before that, do you pay attention to where Thera is at all times? Oh, you could feel that, huh? It's the effect of a skill, I'm aware in the back of my mind, but it's not something I really notice unless I think about it, kind of like breathing. Sounds handy, don't suppose you could teach me how to get it? It was when Will asked that he felt part of his mind go blank, an effect of the covenant he'd made entering the trial. Even mind to mind he wouldn't be allowed to reveal information about the trial he took, not even its rewards. At the same time, he didn't want to just not answer. This was his friend and it was obvious how he would use it if he could get it. The thoughts of the skill's potential for keeping Steph safe were leaking from his mind. If he could keep the people he cared about safer by revealing a little, at least enough to be a hint, then he would do it. As the moment stretched on in silence as Ben's every attempt to reveal it was blocked, Will spoke up. If it's something private, just forget I asked. No, it's not that, just give me a minute or two. It would be good if I could tell you anything anyway. Will could hear the determination in Ben's thoughts, but couldn't understand the struggle his friend seemed to be going through, but resolved to patiently wait for his answer. At this point, Ben had activated hidden mind around one of his minds, so that one could think clearly on how to give Will a hint as the other was disrupted each time. The fact he was failing bothered him deeply. He understood he would be kept from talking about things like this when he left the trial, but to be kept from even thinking seemed like a much greater violation of personal freedoms, especially considering that he wasn't trying to convey anything on the trial itself, just the reward it gave. Everything I try and tell him is blocked out, what else am I supposed to do? He thought to himself in a blocked-off corner of his mind. I refuse to accept a God dictating what I can and can't think in my own head, I just need to be indirect maybe? Or vague or broad. There's got to be an option. More minutes ticked by as they sat in silence until finally, Ben found a single thought that made it through. Retrace my steps. Sacrilege level increased. Oops. Well, what Myriad doesn't know won't hurt him. He pushed the level up aside as he heard Will's thoughts on what he had been able to tell him. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make his friend curious that he had to work so hard for so long just to give him such a small amount of information. He let Will reflect on what he'd been told a bit already before getting him back to the topic he originally wanted to discuss. So anyway, you wanted to tell me you started dating Steph? His friend's mind briefly froze as a variety of thoughts passed through his head, but he was able to quickly calm them. Did I really give that away as soon as you started reading my mind? You weren't as bad as Steph, who spilled that and more as soon as I connected to her. So what's the deal? Why are you guys keeping it hush-hush? We weren't exactly keeping it secret. Will thought as he shifted about awkwardly. I just wanted to be the one to tell you and to talk about it is all. Ben didn't say anything, but he let a silent question hang between them and the feelings he was conveying. Look, it's a bit awkward to talk about, but there's only about 20 humans on the world. I was just a little worried about how you'd feel about there being one less available, you know? Ben stared at his friend for a minute before sighing and speaking aloud. You're an idiot. Huh? Sorry, slipped out. But listen, I can't even begin to express how little that matters. But we aren't the only ones who have gotten together, you know. Aren't you even a little worried about winding up alone? He could feel that Will's concern came from a place of genuine care, so he did his best to not let any of his exasperation at the conversation leak out. Listen, I get where you're coming from, but I'm so not concerned. I'm not really looking to make romance a priority when we might all be dead in 2 years, and even if every human on the planet pairs up other than me, I don't personally have any issues dating outside of my species. Wait, so does that mean you and Thera are really? Still no. He thought, cutting his friend off. It just means that enough races on this world are basically human anyway, so if I ever get the urge to date, I won't be left with sea slugs or something. Anyway, is that why you didn't just tell me immediately? No. Well, maybe a little. Will, you're both my friends, of course I'm happy for you. Well, mostly happy for Steph. What? Ben pinched the bridge of his nose. This entire conversation wasn't one he'd been expecting to have, and the fact that his friend was still oblivious to this when they were now dating was a pain. Dude, she's had a thing for you since we started high school. You're just dumb. What? Huh, ask her about it later. Since I have you now, you can help me practice my connect until we leave. The rest of the day went on smoothly enough. Steph and Wedrow took turns opening gates for them to go through, and each time they had to stop, Will took him out to try and get the hammer wielder skill, though without the same luck he seemed to have for knife wielder. It was by the time the day was done that they made it to their destination, or at least the general vicinity of their destination. They were deep in the untamed lands, a wooded area that had yet to be colonized by the various races of this world, even after all of the time they'd been on it. There were a few reasons for that. From what he could infer from the information he had, Ben was pretty certain that this world and all others that the various races had fled from were much larger than Earth. He wasn't sure just how much, but that could be a question for Quillith when he saw him next. Other than that, the races around were typically more focused on strengthening themselves than expanding, with complex international policies devoted to the topic, as well as the fact that not all races lived on land. Plenty made their homes in the ocean, and more than a few made their homes deep within the world itself, meaning that space wasn't used the same way that it would be on his homeworld. All of this combined to make a world that could seem oddly empty once one left the more populated regions, which also made it easy for some demons to slip through the cracks, and made it hard for them to be eradicated from the world. As a result, higher-level adventurers would be paid to explore the lands to take care of any potentially dangerous creature that might inhabit it, and many of the world's nations would send their armies off for experience as well. It was with all of this in mind that Wedro sat them all down to talk after setting up camp for the day. Starting tomorrow, we'll be beginning to search for any of the demons that have been spotted in the vicinity. Our sources think there may be roughly 5 of them, but don't let your guard down on that account. Countless worlds haven't been lost for them to be taken lightly. Now I wouldn't expect the otherworlders to know this, but Thera, are you aware of the change that began a few hundred years ago? Are you talking about the sorrow? She told him, not having expected to be quizzed. Correct, he said with a nod of approval. For the rest of you, we aren't sure how it happened, but a few hundred years in the past all demons underwent a change, causing some sort of deep mind effect in anyone that attacks them. Put simply, there's a likely chance that after you kill a demon, you'll feel terrible for the act, while some might not even be able to attack them at all. Not all people are affected, but it seems the majority of them are, and it's at that time that any surrounding ones will take advantage of that moment of weakness to strike. If you are the sort to be affected, it has been shown you can get through it with practice, but until that point you're a threat to not only yourself but the people around you, hence why you need experience fighting them. If it's a passive magic, I'll probably be fine, but if it's a direct spell or skill, I'm not sure how I'll react. I guess as long as I can keep my wits about me, it will be okay, and with all these powerhouses around me, it's not like I'll need to do anything anyway. His role was hunting any weak creatures around to work on getting Hammer Wielder while everyone else actually practiced on demons, and whatever other tough monsters were unfortunate enough to wander by, he could leave the real fighting to his friends. As much as it would suck to miss out on what sounded like free job experience, he wouldn't be any use without any tools to use. In the meantime, the worm went on. We'll divide up the watch in case anything happens, men will take first, women second. If it's all the same, couldn't I just take my watch with Thera? While he personally didn't care how it was split up, he knew she and Steph would still probably be feeling too awkward for it and tried to spare them, but Wedro was having none of it. It's not. At least for the other 3, they'll all need experience with occasionally working with people they aren't used to once the war breaks out, not to mention the fact that I know how the tents are split, and I already said I won't be accepting any mating behavior. Come on, do you really think anyone will feel frisky during a hunt in the woods? Instead of answering, the worm simply gave Will and Steph a pointed look they wouldn't return, and Ben's head fell into his hands as he understood. You've got to be kidding me. With that decided, the girls went to get some sleep while Ben and Will kept watch on the camp, at least that was how it was supposed to be. Since Myriad was around and Will had life sense, he was able to pass the time talking to them both while he focused on training his enchanting. It had been a while since he'd played with the skill's more destructive properties, and it just so happened there was a boulder near the camp. It was bigger than anything he'd tried to carve into with his skill before, but he also had more control than the last time he'd practiced with it and began slowly chipping away at the stone, making the material easier to work with his crafting while at the same time piling enchantments onto certain regions to cause parts of it to break down. At this point, he barely had to think to do it, just pile up enchantments, wipe away the dust, and repeat again and again and again. It was basically just magic sculpting, and it was peaceful. From what Will and his god were telling him, there wasn't anything around to be worried about as far as they could see, and he'd be no good in a fight anyway, so he took the time to relax. It was as he was finishing up, he felt a head hovering over his shoulder. So what's this one? Thera asked as she looked at his work. From what she could see, it was his biggest sculpture by far, at almost the same height he was sitting down, and appeared to be some sort of bulky animal with its head hanging down. Sad panda. It's an animal from my world. Why would you make it sad? Steph asked from behind him, apparently up as well. Pandas are so cute, they should be allowed some joy. It just felt right, he said with a shrug. Anyway, I take it, it's time to switch shifts. Unfortunately, Steph said, sounding defeated. There's never enough time for sleep on these smaller excursions. It's so much nicer when we're part of a big enough group that we only need to do this every couple days. Well, it's only a week, Will told her with cheer. And now for some well-deserved rest, come on Ben. Ben bid the girls a good night, leaving them to awkwardly figure out how to interact for the next 5 or 6 hours as he got himself set up in bed. As far as day 1 went, it was peaceful enough. He got one of 2 skills and was able to spend the time reconnecting with his friends while at least beginning to help smooth things over between them and Thera. If they could all grow a bit stronger, then that was for the best, and if he managed to get the hammer wielder skill fairly quickly as well, he'd have more than enough time to do his own thing and focus on his skills, maybe even collect some uncommon or rare plants for his alchemy. As he drifted off to sleep, he thought to himself, maybe this won't be too bad. Why am I so bad at this? Ben yelled out after hammering his 20th monster that day. They'd been hunting for demons for the last 2 days now without luck, and while everyone else would be busy fighting stronger creatures that Thera would draw to them by removing her cloak and resistance band, Ben was put in charge of handling the smaller beasts, making sure to call out for help if things got too bad, and he was hating every minute of it. Aside from how unpleasant it felt when bones broke under each of his blows, the attacks left everything he killed practically unusable for materials, meaning not only could he not make use of the parts later, but he also couldn't get any practice for his dismantling with the condition he left them in. Since he'd just finished taking apart everything he'd gotten with his knife training, that meant he would only be able to practice with whatever the others killed. It's not good to be in such a rush, Wedrow told him as he observed everyone fight from the side. The Zeroth level can sometimes take weeks or months to learn, instead be grateful you got the first one so fast. I get what you're saying, but the sooner I get it the sooner I can relax and focus on training the skills I really care about. I think it should be pretty clear I'm not a fighter. He'd already had to have Steph heal him a couple of times today when something got too close or he got careless. It was nothing major, but he wouldn't be able to survive the things the others had been fighting, especially the current one. Calling it a dragon would be too generous, but it was some sort of lizard monster. About the size of a lion with 6 legs and dark green scales, it seemed to be able to use air magic, whipping the winds around its attackers and battering them with dust and debris, trying to push off both them and their attacks, though to no avail. Against it, Will, Steph, and Thera stood strong. As mages, Steph and Thera stood to the back to avoid being swept up by the gale and fought with a strategy they'd worked out after the first day of fighting, with Steph opening gates between Thera's attacks and the beast to reduce its ability to react to the small boulders flying towards it, while Will would run in between spells to attack head-on, and was doing surprisingly good as well. With his combination of tough skin, enhanced strength, and unarmed master as his blessed skills, he was well equipped to fight head-to-head against the beast. But he had 2 other things going for him as well. The first was that while Steph was setting up gates for Thera's magic, she was also using time magic on Will to speed him up, making him move faster and react quicker. The second was all him though, something he'd apparently learned while he was training. Sometime in the last year, he'd managed to learn an augmentation skill. Augmentation skills were fairly common among people with warrior or combat builds, but Ben had never actually seen one in person before, and it was another class of skill he'd never be able to get himself. The reason for that was simple: much like magic skills, they were dependent on the affinities a person already possessed, meaning there was no way he could learn any with the low ones he was stuck with. It would wrap a person's body or weapons in the mana as a way to inflict extra damage compared to what the attacks would normally be able to achieve, and at a significantly lower mana cost than if one was to compare it against a mage trying to achieve the same result, making it far more suited to warriors that would typically have a lower mana capacity. Of course, given how high all of Will's attributes were when he got to the world, he could have just learned a magic instead and been able to use it in a complete form, but Ben felt this style suited his friend more. As for the specific one Will learned, it looked like he'd gone with something even more surprising than just having the skill be tied to one specific affinity. Each augmentation skill had the same properties of the affinities they would be tied to, so supposedly fire, earth, and death ended up being the most popular choices when it came to fighting, but Will had managed something significantly more rare and managed to get a lightning augmentation. Just as there were magic skills that required decent affinities for multiple types of magic and could rarely be achieved without awakening the skills, the same held true for augmentations, possible to an even greater degree. While it would be possible for a mage that had water, air, and light magic to weave together lightning spells at an increased difficulty and mana cost, a person couldn't just use water, air, and light augmentations to produce a lightning one, meaning that Will had to train in those three augmentations at the same time, as well as got exceptionally lucky to actually get the combined skill, and from the looks of it, it was worth it. Between each of the girls' spells, Will would rush in and deliver a barrage of electrified punches, jolts of energy running up his arm as he did before jumping away as it tried to attack him and creating another opening for the next earth bullet. Thera was sticking with that spell for now since the sacrificial enchantments on her staff could handle it, as well as the fact that even though it was still unreasonably large, she was able to make it smaller now than before her magics leveled up, and as a result could fire more off without putting more strain on the staff and enchantments on it, meaning she wouldn't destroy it during the remaining few days they were out here. The creature was surviving her attacks easier than most had in the past, but they were deep in the wild instead of towards towns, and since there wasn't a large amount of hunters and adventurers out to train and cull dangerous creatures, the apex predators around were able to get the time to grow stronger and more deadly. Even combining her magic with Steph's, the creature was able to react and attempt to dodge or lower the severity of the blow with a blast of air between the attack. While those attempts had few successes, it did keep them from landing a critical blow, instead just wearing down the beast's defenses. Still it was enough. Scales cracked and a body that was battered and broken. Once Will pulled away after his final round of punches, Thera fired one more spell and brought the creature down. Once its death was confirmed, Ben quickly reapplied the enchantments to Thera's staff and checked its condition before he got to dismantling it as the rest tried to lure in more monsters to train against. As he was taking it apart, he couldn't help but think that Thera looked like she was enjoying herself. This was how she'd always wanted to hunt after all, head-on against powerful creatures, pushing herself and her magic to its potential, and with Will and Steph she could. Even if Ben finished this trip with the knife and hammer wielder skills, he wouldn't be a fighter, he simply didn't have the drive. What that meant then was that she needed to find a real party to adventure with, a thought that left him feeling more complicated than he'd expected. Their hunting together was always supposed to be just until she found a new party, but he'd had fun doing it with her. Getting to test out his tool was exciting, and constantly trying to figure out how to improve her staves gave him a good challenge. Not to mention he just liked her company. Back when he'd go out hunting alone to gather supplies for his crafting, it was a boring affair aside from when he'd actually get his catch. Now he had someone he could talk to pass the time, and through that had grown their friendship. It wasn't like they would lose that if they stopped hunting together, especially not while they lived under the same roof, but it was a change he wasn't sure he'd like. Still, I should probably talk to her about it at some point. Enough people in Stonewall seem open enough with her now that she could probably find a real party and grow her skills with them. They finished their hunt for the day, and Wedrow put away everything Ben had dismantled into his storage while he threw together a meal for everyone. He'd been absolutely crushed on the first day when he'd discovered he'd made the terrible mistake of forgetting his Kiss the Cook apron and chef's hat, but moved on the best he could since he was the only cook of the group. Thankfully Wedrow and Steph had packed away some pans and ingredients, and with all of the meat they'd gathered they were able to enjoy a simple but tasty meal. It was after this, when everyone had about an hour before the girls would rest, that they all would sit and talk or work on their skills, that Ben was able to get a moment alone with Thera. "Hey, how was the hunting today?" he asked, casually, trying not to display any of his concerns on his face. "It seemed to work," and she responded with a voice filled with enthusiasm. Fantastic. The first day was a little rocky, but now I don't think I've ever worked so well as part of a team before. Even if she still wasn't sure how to interact with his friends, she'd found them to be more than accommodating of her, making a strategy that would compensate for her own lack of abilities, and accepting her suggestion to let her use her charm to lure out monsters since they were all equipped to deal with it. Outside of working with Ben, she doubted she'd ever had a better experience than this during her time moving from party to party at the guild. Back when she first started, she never would have imagined such a thing could feel so satisfying. I'm glad to hear it. Do you think that's something you'd want to do more often? I mean, yeah, if your friends come by again, I'd love to fight with them more. Doesn't sound like it will be very often though. Steph said her schedule is pretty busy, and they only forced the issue because of... Well, you know. So you're talking more with Steph? He asked with a smile, happy to see Thera getting along with someone else. Well, we are on watch together, and she seems to want to chat. I just don't want to be rude, she told him awkwardly, though continued in a quieter voice. She does seem nice though. I'm glad, but I was really more talking about when we're back in Stonewall. Sure, I guess if we could find a party member or two we could give it a try. Of course, I'm not a fan of most of them, and the ones that are left would need to be okay partying with us, despite my rumors and the fact that you're not really a fighter. It sounded like she was teasing him on the last part, but she'd just cut to the heart of the matter. That's actually kind of the point. Your earth magic's gone up, and I know you want to hunt in a bit more of a proper way than how I do it. Do you think you'd rather find a real party? At your current skill level, I'm sure you won't have any issues. He didn't expect his gut to twist so much just by bringing it up, but she was going to have to find a real group to adventure with eventually anyway. It would be better to do it now that she had the skill than to put it off for much longer. Unfortunately, her reaction showed she hated hearing it as much as he hated saying it. What? Are you not happy having me to hunt with? The mood had shifted and her voice wound up, tinged with both anger and sadness, so he rushed to explain himself. It's not that, I just can't do anything like Steph or Will can. I can't fight and I can't help you fight, all I can do is manage your equipment and make traps. I know we still work well together now, but as your magic keeps improving I won't be able to keep up. Wouldn't it be better to start finding a team you could work with sooner than later? If I get better, then you'll just have to too, she fumed. Besides, I wouldn't be able to tolerate anyone in town by myself, so if you don't like it just deal with me until I can prove to my uncle that I can hunt by myself. Now if that's all I need to get some sleep. With that she stormed off, leaving Ben to himself. Well, that could have gone better. After his watch with Will came to an end, Ben tried to talk to Thera a bit, but she wasn't in the mood and he got the impression she hadn't actually gotten any rest. Guilt and a desire to fix things held off his own sleep for a while, but eventually he succumbed and found himself in Myriad's realm. What's up, Myriad? Managed to see any demons around for us? He asked his god while sounding clearly depressed. None yet, but is that really what you want to talk about? Of course it is, I didn't ask for nothing. It was after the first night that Ben asked his god if he could keep an eye out for them, which Myriad agreed to. Killing demons was an important role after all. With the invasion soon, they couldn't worry about the enemy forces already on the world. Well, I'll let you know if I do, but for now why not talk to me about what happened earlier? I am meant to help guide you and share wisdom after all. Ben sighed. I just don't want her to be mad at me. You think she needs to find a real party too, right? Is that what you want? What does that matter? Well, since Thera pretty clearly doesn't want to, then I think the only reason would be if that's what you want. Alright, no I don't, but that doesn't change the fact that she would be able to get more combat experience in a real party than with me. She can definitely take on stronger beasts than I can, and if she's stuck hunting the way I do I'll just be holding her back. Alright, but so what? What do you mean so what? I don't want to be holding her back, and she wants to rise up the ranks as an adventurer. The solution seems obvious. Ben, people's priorities can change. She wanted to earn approval by having a high rank, now maybe approval isn't as important as having a friend to be with. Besides, wasn't it at the end of the trial you both had that touching moment about being a team? That meant a lot to her. Ben fell silent as he thought about what his God said. They had said they were a team, that they would solve their problems together and fight together if they needed to. Of course he meant it, but did that mean Thera would rather work with him, stuck fighting smaller and weaker monsters than what it looked like she could currently handle? He didn't want to stop working with her either, so if that was the case, what was the issue? Damn it, he muttered quietly. I get what you're saying, I really messed up. What do you think I should do? Well, when a member of my race wanted to apologize, we would tear out our venom sacs to symbolize vulnerability. An option that doesn't leave me maimed, please? They would grow back. Not many of my parts do. Picky but fine, just go and be sincere about it. Nothing good will come from not just saying what you mean. He looked up to his God and gave a brief prayer of thanks. You're right, I won't be a baby about it and apologize when I wake up, thanks myriad. Of course, it's what I'm here for. Although if you did want to show some gratitude, you could go out and get me some believers. His God said suggestively, pulling a laugh from Ben. Well, we'll see. No word on if I completed the quest yet? As things stand, I'd say you'll have it completed in a day or two. Some people's faith has grown stronger and others have taken the plunge to converting. There's only a couple who haven't received your letters yet, but it should push you over the edge when they do. Sweet, and then I can finally get something a bit better than job levels, right? Different doesn't mean better, but yes, I'm sure some of your next rewards will be to your liking, that is, if you are able to complete them. That is always the catch, isn't it? Still, I haven't done too bad so far, I'm sure I can make whatever it is work out. Without completely twisting my intent like with the church, right? As Ben looked away, Myriad felt his worries only increase, only made worse as events began to change around Ben's sleeping body. Infinite hells. Wake up and run. His God yelled at him, and before Ben could ask what was going on, he was up and conscious, hearing the pandemonium erupt around him. Why did I have to act like that? It's not like he was trying to get rid of me, he just thinks I need someone better to hunt with, which maybe isn't wrong, but... Thera, is everything okay? Steph asked her while they kept watch together. The first 2 nights they'd been able to make a small amount of chit-chat at least, but on this one she was completely silent and absorbed in her thoughts. Thera's first instinct was to just lie and say everything was fine, but she didn't end up getting a wink of sleep after how she'd been feeling, and she did want to talk about it. Since Sonia wasn't around and the person she'd normally talk to about her issues was the one she was fighting with, maybe it wouldn't hurt to open up to her just a little. I had a fight with Ben, she admitted, feeling awkward as she did. Oh no, what happened? It's dumb, he tried to talk to me about finding a real party to hunt with and I reacted badly. He's a craftsman, Steph said, trying to be careful with her words. Mind telling me how you both ended up hunting together, to begin with? She'd gotten the abridged version of the story in Ben's letters, but was curious about the finer details that she'd previously missed. Thera was agreeable at least and began awkwardly recounting the tale of how they started working together, both of them being forced into it by her uncle, his annoying way of trying to form a friendship while she just wanted to keep her distance, what they both went through dealing first with Roan, then everything her mother set up in Analia. When she looked back on it, she couldn't help but think that despite all the insanity they'd been through, it had been a fun year, maybe one of the most enjoyable she'd had. Even when considering that she'd faced death from both a madman and a god's trial, it was still better than the monotony that life previously held for her. Reminiscing like that brought a faint smile to her lips, hidden by her hood, but Steph seemed to take away something different from Thera's story. That idiot, she fumed, keeping herself from yelling it out, for the sake of those sleeping. In not a single letter did he tell us how many times he's apparently almost died. I'm sure he probably just didn't want to worry you, Thera was quick to say, realizing that she might have revealed more than she should have. I'll be talking to him about that later. But anyway, aren't you just worried about losing him? Her silence spoke volumes, making Steph want to dig deeper. She wanted the chance to grow closer with Thera, after all, not to mention satisfying her own curiosity. So about the whole marriage thing, what's that have to do with anything? Just humor me, Steph told her. Let's say you can't cancel the engagement, your mom sounds crafty, maybe she'll be able to force the issue. How do you think you'd feel if you had to marry Ben? Thera thought for a moment. She hadn't even considered the prospect that her mother might try to force things more than she already had, but it was more possible than she'd like to admit. As for how she would feel. Sad. I think it would make me sad. It wasn't the answer Steph had expected, nor remotely close to what she'd hoped for. She was aware of the same issue that Will had spoken of to Ben. With the number of humans on the planet and the fact that they could expect some to die in the war if it came sooner than later, Ben might end up alone on top of being the only one without any sort of backing. She had hoped that the care Thera seemed to have for him might lean toward the romantic end so that he wouldn't have to go through that and could potentially get some of the benefits he'd been denied due to the skills he'd arrived with, but maybe that wasn't to be. Still, she wanted to probe further, especially after an answer like that. Isn't that a bit extreme? I know he can be a bit obsessive when he starts a task, and pretty willing to ignore a personal bubble, but I'm sure you must see what a nice guy he is? It's not about that, she said with a shake of her head. He's already aware of this, but as a half-breed I can expect an unusually long life. I've never wanted to get married because the idea of watching someone I care about slowly die like that sounds terrible. Steph was momentarily silenced. She hadn't expected such a depressing reason, and it took a bit to know what to say. In that case, what about if Ben marries someone else? Are you going to be all right with that? Why wouldn't I be? She asked in confusion. There are plenty of times when people enter a relationship with someone else that they have less time for other people they care about. It's not something anyone ever really means to happen, but it can happen. Thera froze. She didn't have any real friends growing up and had dismissed the idea of romance when she was old enough to understand what that would mean for her, so she didn't have any experience losing a friend she cared about to it. Did that happen for you and Will? She suddenly asked, wanting more information and making Steph blush in the process. What do you mean? Oh sorry, I guess I assumed from what I saw when Ben connected us. Do humans normally do that sort of thing with people they're just friends with? It seemed like something that would normally be extremely private for a lot of races, and had left her blushing under her hood for a while after it happened. If humans just act like that together with anyone they care about, then does that mean Ben would want to and only hasn't out of respect for cultural differences? So would he want some time alone with Steph too? Just the thought left her flushed all over again, but Steph was at least quick to correct her. No. She yelled a bit louder than intended. Yeah, me and Will are together, we don't just do that sort of thing with anyone, so don't think anything weird. As for us, well, most of the people we care about are on a whole other world. I send letters to a couple other classmates, and so does Will, but it's not really the same. Oh good, Thera said, strangely relieved to hear it. Wait, relieved? Why should I feel so? Back to the matter at hand, I just think you should clear things up by telling him how you feel. If you want to keep hunting with him, tell him that and tell him why. I know you're right, but I made a scene about it and it's going to be so awkward. I'm sure it will be fine, I bet Ben is just as anxious, Steph told her confidently. Besides, nothing will get better if neither of you say anything. Alright, I'll talk to him in the morning. Thanks. Steph smiled as Thera sat with her thoughts, and both were content to enjoy their peace for the rest of the night, right up until the ground around them exploded. As Ben got up, a sight of chaos greeted him. At first, he thought a horde of different monsters had come to attack them. They were all so varied in shape and size, it was like the attack on Stonewall all over again, but as he looked closer he found they all had distinct similarities. Despite differences in body structure big enough that they could be mistaken for different species, they all had dark red scales and soulless violet eyes, marking them all as members of one race. Demons. From what he'd learned, one of the most dangerous aspects of the creatures was their adaptability. their forms drastically changing within single generations to fit their environments, making them well-suited to conquer various worlds, and incredibly dangerous to have on the planet, and now their little hunting group had become their prey. Even worse, there wasn't the trifling 5 they'd been told to expect, but 30 of them at least, and some making a beeline to him as soon as they saw him. He didn't know what to do, what he could do. He wasn't a fighter, and he didn't sleep with the barrier gauntlet on. How was he supposed to run? One that was built like a bull lunged at him and he felt death in front of him again. He reached his arm out, prepared to lose it so he could connect with the creature to try and scare it off like he'd done in the past, but before he could Will appeared and lunged at it, knocking it away briefly and giving him enough time to grab Ben in his arms and run with all of his might away from the camp. "Well, what are you doing?" Ben yelled as he was being manhandled. "We can't leave everyone else. Stop moving so much. It's already too late." His friend yelled back, pain lacing his voice. "I already saw their bodies being dragged into pits when I got up. If even Wedrow was killed, then there's nothing I can do but get out of here." "Killed? No, but Thera, Steph, they can't be." He felt sick with horror. For his friends to be gone in the blink of an eye while he slept, how could that happen? How was he supposed to tell everyone? 2 of the few people he cared about in the world were gone just like that, and his horror turned to rage as he screamed in his mind. Myriad. How the fuck did this happen? He knew his God was watching, considering everything that happened, and he wanted answers. This couldn't have happened. Myriad had been watching the entire time, even if he wasn't omniscient or omnipresent. How could they have been snuck up on like that? When his God did speak up, it was with a voice filled with remorse. "They were burrowers. It looks like they crawled through the earth to get to them, which is why I didn't see their movements. Ben, I'm sorry. There has to be something we can do, they can't just be gone. There's only a few chasing you, at least on land. I can't guarantee there aren't more beneath the earth. Please, just let Will run with you." He gritted his teeth and tried to keep silent, not trusting himself to speak at the moment. His friends would be dead or dying, and there was nothing he could do about it. Once they finally felt they were a safe distance away and Myriad said they were no longer being chased, they sat in silence. Will had spent almost half the day running and they needed to figure out what to do from there, but neither of them had the energy to talk. Instead, Will threw together a fire, and Ben let himself fall into despair. With his friends gone, he felt all the energy seep out of him in a way he couldn't stop. It was worse than when he'd taken a few days after he'd been left behind at the church. What was he supposed to do now? That didn't even mention how pressing things looked for his own survival. He and Will were trapped hundreds of kilometers into the untamed lands, and without a space mage around there wasn't any way out other than walking, a task that would take ages to accomplish. "You don't need to worry about that at least," his God said tenderly. "I've alerted the war gods of the size of the demon's nest. As soon as their nations are done preparing, they'll send a force out to attack and collect you. It will take a couple weeks before they're ready for an excursion like this, but please just sit tight." Weeks to stew on his failure to keep the people he cared about safe, a nice prelude to the lifetime of regret that was sure to follow. He had to at least try to recover Thera's body for her family, though there would probably only be bones left. Maybe her father would kill him for failing his daughter like that. With the way he felt he wouldn't mind, and he wanted her to properly be laid to rest anyway. He felt his eyes move towards where he thought she would be, and then widen as a sliver of hope filled him. Myriad, if Thera was dead, would bind still work? There was a chance that he really was just being pointed to her body, but he wanted to believe, and his God didn't disappoint. "No, if you can still feel her through the skill, she's still alive," Myriad said, hope returning to his own voice. "It's been over half a day, for her to still be alive, maybe she escaped." Ben's heart was pounding at the thought. If she did escape from the demons, then maybe the others did with her. They could all be alive, maybe even looking for them. Since their group had the space mages, they would be able to make plenty of distance from the demons after all. They might even be in a better situation than he and Will. "Myriad, I don't care how you do it, contact Analia and see if she can find and contact Thera, since she's her believer. That might be hard. As one of the gods with the largest surviving populations, she can be incredibly busy and hard to make time with. If she doesn't make the time for you, tell her, I fucking swear, I'll devote whatever little of my life remains to stealing as many of her believers from her as I can, he almost yelled before turning to Will, who turned to watch him seemingly talk to himself. Will, I have some good news, they might all be okay. What? How can you be sure? He sounded suspicious, but Ben saw some light return to his friend's eyes with that bit of hope. One of my skills links my soul to Thera's. Supposedly it would stop working if she died, so I can at least say she's alright, and if she escaped then Steph and Wedro might be as well. Will took a deep breath and covered his eyes, trying to hold back tears. Oh, thank God. I asked my God to contact Thera's to get in touch with her, hopefully we can all reunite soon. Even with the good news, the nervousness didn't leave them as they waited for answers. Minutes passed and turned into an hour, and as Ben was beginning to seriously consider how to make good on his threat, Myriad came back. The good news is they're alive, his God told him hesitantly. Then the bad news? He asked, feeling his stomach drop, before he even got an answer. We don't know why, but they're being held captive by the demons. Wait, what? Do demons take prisoners? He asked in shock. Not that we've ever seen. Analia is talking to Thera now, and it seems the other two are unconscious, but it looks like they're trapped in a cave filled with them. Frankly, we don't know if they're just being saved to eat later, or if there's something else going on. Then we have to save them. He yelled, getting a look from Will as he did, and quickly explaining what he'd learned. They went the opposite way you ran off. It would take at least a day to get there if you run. I'm sorry, Ben, but the risk is too great. They'll likely be dead by the time you can do anything. That doesn't mean we can just do nothing. I'll follow my skill and we'll figure something out on the way, so warn us if you see anything ahead. If they die before we can get there, then we'll leave. Will, come on, we need to get going. They started running, but it was apparent that Ben couldn't keep up with Will's speed, so again his friend carried him as Ben passed on the information he'd gotten from his god. It looked like there was 40 of them in a deep cave system and they were being left alone, save for small, snake-like creatures the demons had feeding off them, with Thera getting the worst of it, 5 being attached to her unlike the others who got 1 each, and hers were being changed out frequently. But why is she getting the worst of it? He thought to his god. Are they trying to poison or kill her in particular? We can only make assumptions, but since it doesn't seem to be affecting her health, we've established another theory. The 3 of your group who they made sure to secure first were all mages, and from what Thera said the first creature they attached to her exploded like a staff that had too much mana being forced through it, so we think they suck out an organism's mana. It would explain why she has so many feeding off of her in particular, as well as why the other 2 were being kept unconscious if they were both constantly left without mana, we just don't know why. So you don't know what these things are? We've never seen animals like these before, but there are a lot of creatures in the untamed lands that are rare or unusual. It wouldn't be surprising to have a number of them be capable of things we've been unaware of. Damn it, and there's nothing you can do? Space mages as capable as Wedro and Steph are far from common. Even if they have an awakened version of the skill, which is rare enough alone, having the mana it would take to make jumps to a place they'd never before been is a whole other issue. On top of that, we'd need to assemble a force to take on the demons. If you're already going to be outnumbered when the war really starts, it's not like you need to bring an army, right? Normally correct, but these ones are too far along in their development. They can't be underestimated and need to be thoroughly exterminated. What? Why? What does that even mean? Myriad was silent for a moment in thought. That information is considered confidential, but as an apostle you are allowed the right to know so long as you keep it secret. Would you still like to know? If you're saying I can't tell Will when it's something he might need to know to stay alive, then I can always find another god. Ben told his god threateningly. You aren't wrong, but you do make things complicated for me, don't you? I believe I can get away with only minor punishments on the grounds that it will be revealed to him should he survive anyway, but give me a moment to talk to the others around first. Cool, While you're doing that, tell them their rules are bullshit and likely to get someone killed." Myriad didn't answer and was silent for a few minutes before coming back to him. "There was enough agreement amongst the ones I was able to talk to that the issue should be minimal. We only ask you and will keep it to yourselves should you survive." "Fine, what is it that's such a big deal you couldn't just tell us?" "There's an invader among them, with more likely to be born as time goes on." "Wait, what? How is that possible? And what does that have to do with their development?" It's something we only discovered for ourselves after coming to this world, but you could call demons the first stage of their species' life cycle. We aren't sure how, but after accumulating enough kills, they're able to move on to the next stage of their development, where they gain sapience and an increase of power. There is just one at that stage currently, but we suspect more will rise to it sooner than later, meaning they're already more powerful than the average one that would come through a gate. "Wait, are you saying when the war starts they send their youngest and weakest through and they've still managed to take down worlds?" Fucking hell. No wonder they didn't spread this around. That would be pretty demoralizing to anyone who learned just what they were fighting. Any advice? Yes, give up. You're outnumbered and seeking death if you continue this. If they need to extract their mana for some reason, then Thera should live long enough to be saved as a near-bottomless supply. And Steph and Wedro? That's what I thought. I'm not just doing nothing, Myriad, so you and those other gods can put your heads together and see if you can think of anything for now, while I try and work out what I can. We'll see what we can do. For now, just stay safe. With that, his god left to figure out what he could with the other gods, while Ben reflected on what he could achieve after filling Will in. The fact that he was no fighter was showing its ugly head again. He'd only gotten knife wielding, and at the Zeroth level there wasn't much use in it, not to mention his only knife was still at camp, which meant that if he was going to fight it would be as a craftsman. The only question was how. If they did go back to the camp, there was a chance they might be able to grab some supplies, but there was always the chance there were demons still there, especially if they were being led by an invader. There was also the question of how dangerous that one would be. Given that it had presumably grown up in the wilds of this world as opposed to whichever one they'd normally come from, it couldn't be that smart. He didn't care what weird rules this universe played by, unless knowledge was passed on. You could only know the things you'd learned for yourself. If that was the case, then what did Ben know? He didn't have a way to put his smithing knowledge to use out in the middle of the woods, and as for enchanting, he might be able to pull something off with his magic rings, and if he learned the skills Will possessed, but he wasn't sure he could make a weapon out of that. Knowledge from Earth? It hadn't proved itself to be exceptionally helpful in his life yet. He just hadn't learned anything in his old world that would be useful to his new reality, with the exception of a couple of things that might make him some wealth if he was to replicate them on this world. If Thera was here, he was sure she could cause some chaos with her magic. Even out here, he could probably create a makeshift staff or two that could handle a single spell, but she was one of the ones he needed to save. Maybe he could work out a plan through the gods once he got to her, but he needed to get through all of those demons first. So what did he have? Was there anything he was good at that he could put to use, maybe to cull their numbers a bit? Actually, he thought, inspiration striking him. Maybe my usual way would work here? When chaos exploded around her during her watch, she and Steph were dragged into the ground before she could even react, and in that moment she was sure she would die to the very element she'd been working so hard to tame. She did the best she could to keep the dirt from sliding down her throat when she felt something latch onto her wrist and her mana pour into it in an unending torrent like a path had been created for it to move out into, and whatever created it quickly felt the backlash of the act as it exploded like so many staves she'd passed her mana through had before. In the back of her mind, where she wasn't concerned about dirt filling her mouth and lungs, she noticed a thick wetness where it happened, and she didn't think whatever felt the effects of her power was a simple tool, but she still didn't know what was going on and why whatever it was that had her dragged her off into the earth. Hours passed and whatever the creature was had placed a limb over her face to keep the dirt out, but it was still a struggle. The panic had subsided with time though, and she was able to think clearer, at least enough to wonder why whatever this thing was had kept her alive, and how her companions were. Had they all been taken too? Had they escaped and were looking for her? Would she ever stop being pulled through the ground, mercilessly beaten by any roots and stones that were down there? Most of those questions were answered when she was finally pulled to the surface to find Steph and Wedro were there as well, though her blood went cold when she thought about what that might mean for Ben, and it only got worse as their captors were revealed to be the worst possible option that could exist in the wilds. Demons, and dozens of them. It seemed they had been the real prey all along, as their targets had captured them for reasons she couldn't begin to imagine. It simply didn't happen. Demons killed people, they had no reason to take prisoners. Why would they? They were mindless killing machines. At least that was what she thought until one spoke. 3 of them, It's not enough to strengthen these lot for what I need, but it's a start, especially you, spoke one with a mostly hominid shape, with sharp claws that looked equipped for both digging and fighting, and the thick red scales and violet eyes that were characteristic of their race. It turned to look at Thera, specifically her wrist. How so much can exist in a single body is something I can't believe, but it looks like one mana viper won't be enough. Without another word, the talking demon pointed to the surrounding ones, and 2 of them responded, bringing over some sort of snake-like creatures that as soon as they were released slithered over and latched themselves onto her. She couldn't help it, as soon as she felt the jaws of the 5 monsters pierce her flesh she screamed. The pain wasn't immense, but the situation was terrifying. For all she knew she was being poisoned by the things, with no hope of escape. She could potentially bring the cave down on them with her magic as a final act of resistance, but it would kill her and the other 2 as well. That is if they were even still alive. She saw a mana viper wrapped around each of them, and if they were poisonous, then they could already be dead. If that was the case, and she felt herself fading, then she'd have to at least try to take as many demons as she could with her, no matter the cost. As hours passed, the snakes that had wrapped around her were frequently changed out by the same demon that had captured her, and Thera could see it was coming under the effects of her charm. Thankfully it hadn't become violent as a result, but it was curled up by her feet, and each time another came near her it screeched and scared it off. She was sure if she should be thankful or not. It didn't seem to be intelligent like the other one was, none of them did, so she couldn't try to take advantage of it by directing it to attack the others for her, but she still didn't have any options. She was trapped, and the other 2 weren't waking up. The only positive was that the talking one hadn't come back. That one creature horrified her more than any other by virtue of its existence. If a monster that was already known to be as dangerous as a demon had intelligence as well, how much worse could it become? The only greater concern she had was whatever happened to Ben. If he wasn't here, then she didn't think he'd had any way to escape, but if that was the case there was only one thing that could have happened. An option she couldn't let herself accept no matter what. He can't be dead. There must have been some way for him to make it out of that. There has to be. But how? A smaller part of her asked. He can't fight with just a Zeroth-level skill, and he can't have run from a group this big when his agility was so terrible. He couldn't have escaped. But the logic didn't matter. Even if there was no other option, she refused to let herself believe her only friend had died. As her thoughts circled on the matter, an experience that she'd only felt once before occurred. A voice spoke within her head. Your friend is alive, it's you who's the greater concern. Is that Analia? Hello child, it seems you've already found more excitement since we've met, her god said with a small laugh. I'm glad to see you're still alive, though I wish the circumstances could be better. Analia, I apologize if the situation has me less polite than I should be when having the chance to talk to you, but is there anything you can do? As relieved as she was to hear that Ben was alive, the fact that the other 2 remained unconscious for the entire time she'd been able to see them was a concern in itself. Not to mention that no matter how she racked her brain, she couldn't figure out a way to escape. Her god was silent for a moment before making a request. For now, why don't you tell me everything that's happened and we'll see what we can do. Thera told her everything she knew, from the talking demon to the strange snakes that it called mana vipers they kept latching onto her. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her god sound concerned. Many gods are already aware of the situation and forces will be sent to find you as soon as they can be gathered. And are my parents aware? I've informed your mother, she's already preparing to mobilize her army to save you. Your father, however, went off to meet with various earth spirits to plan for the coming war. Since he doesn't give faith to any god, there is no one to find him, she told her regretfully. Thera grit her teeth. Her father would regularly go out into the world to talk with the spirits he ruled over, but it just had to happen at the worst possible time. When Analia got in contact with her, he'd been her greatest hope for escape. He was usually only gone for 2 weeks at most, but who knew if she'd still be alive by the time she got back. All hope isn't lost, Analia told her calmly. It's possible that your father will be reached, and even if he's not, your friend hasn't given up. Wait, you mean? It seems the child of Myriad is feeling resourceful, and he's on his way. They got back to the camp and collected what they could, giving Ben more options to work with, and he started trying to think them through. He essentially had access to earth, death, and charm magic through his rings, and barrier magic through his retrieved gauntlet. He was cursing himself for not grabbing space and time from Wedrow when he could have, but there was nothing he could do about that now. Unfortunately, Will didn't have any magic himself, but that didn't mean other skills couldn't be put to use, it just came down to how he did it, and he immediately got preparations started to make use of death magic in particular. The first thing he did was have Will search for a number of plants in the area he'd shown him examples of, and then got to work on a few large rocks, breaking them down with his enchanting to make a mortar and pestle, as well as a large jar and something that could act as a bottle once he was done, with a hunk of wood to act as a bottle stopper. It was quicker than he would normally be, but given that he wasn't trying to make a statue out of the stones, he didn't need to worry about the look of the end product, instead focusing on how fast he could make them fit his needs, and was able to complete it within an hour. By the time he was done, Will had come back, arms loaded with plants as he panted for breath. Ben knew his friend must have run around as hard as he could without a break, but he couldn't rest yet, nor would he want to when there was still work to do, and sent him off to fill the jar he'd made with water from any source he could find while Ben got to work on what he was wanted to make. Lifeblood potion, more specifically a failed one. The potion itself was surprisingly simple to put together. 5 different plants went into it, each in a fixed ratio. So long as the ratio was correct, it would work like a charm, and even if the ratio was a little off, then it would just significantly weaken its effect. What gave the potion its well-known and lethal side effect should it be made wrong was confusing its rarest ingredient with an abundantly common look-alike, which he now had in spades. With ingredients gathered, he started stripping the parts of the plants he would need and grinding each up into a fine paste, mixing them and blending as he went to get the smoothest consistency he could. Once Will came back, he started stirring them with a stick as his friend tried to start a fire with his lighting augmentation and some dried leaves, and he got to work reducing the mixture over the heat, taking care not to burn it but letting it go further than if he were trying to make the potion properly to make it thicker. Once it was done, he put it to the side while he focused on its container. One of the more interesting things he'd learned about when making healing potions was that if they were immersed in light or life mana, their effects could increase by a moderate or even significant amount depending on the potion, and he was willing to bet the same would be true of poisons as well. All he needed was a way to do it. Utilizing his death magic ring, he placed the magic in the container so the mana would be directed inward, before giving it to Will to channel his mana through. While almost all materials could hold mana to one degree or another, he had made the jar with common stone, it would begin leaking unstructured mana in minutes. With those preparations completed, the next move would be to get as close to the demon's cave as they could without being spotted. He just had to hope they weren't already aware of them and burrowed under the earth, ready to strike. Are you sure about this, Ben? It's not too late to run. Don't distract me, and just keep watch. He thought it his god, trying to calm himself down out of fear that his pounding heartbeat would give him away. Right now, Will was in the middle of completing his part of the plan, which meant Ben needed to dedicate himself to his. Unfortunately, what that meant for him was constructing a massive enchantment on the stone floor that made up the mouth of the cave. It wasn't complex by any means, being made by simply laying his intended skill down as he went, But it made up for that by being huge, and as a result almost as mana-intense as what he'd just set up before this. No matter how I look at it, I can't help but think this will just annoy them, Myriad said as he inspected his work. A low-level lightning augmentation isn't going to have enough bite to stop them, especially when you're powering it with that. The thing in question was his barrier gauntlet, or at least it was. After copying the barrier skill onto a ring, he'd removed the enchantment from the item itself to use it as a power source for the enchantment he was laying on the cave itself. All that was left to do was start everything. All of the work, the time and effort they'd taken, it was all either about to pay off or fail spectacularly. Quest Glory to God completed. Rewarded with 5 levels to the priest job. Oh sweet, perfect timing. Hey Myriad, give me glory to God again. Don't you at least want to know what your options are? Will any of them pay off immediately if I succeed here like that one would? No, you're correct, this probably is the best choice right now. In that case, hurry up and give it to me, I don't have all day. Received quest, glory to God. Cool, you guys told her where I put the staves, right? Analia did. Are you sure I can't talk you out of being so suicidal? Come on now Myriad, he thought to his god as a grin stretched across his face. Have a little faith. At that, he tossed in dozens of the caltrops he roughly made earlier into the mouth of the cave and screamed at the top of his lungs. Hey demons, hope you're ready to be exterminated. Before he ran for his very life as sounds of movement began behind him. Were they able to hear? Are any following me? It looks like the sound carried through the cave quite well and the invader is forcing almost all the demons to give chase, but was that really the best thing you could think to yell? It doesn't matter if it worked, now how's everything else looking? The poisoned caltrops seemed to have affected a few of them, but the amount you put on each wasn't enough to do immediate harm, it might just slow them down a little. As for the electrified section of the cave, it's acting as an annoyance at best. They definitely seem angrier as they run through it, but I think that's just making them chase you harder. Oh great. He knew he wasn't going to be able to get too much effect out of the lightning enchantment he'd made. The skill it had been produced with was meant to concentrate the mana at a specific point to get a greater effect, to spread it through a cave's entrance and power it through a tool that had been designed to acquire mana for completely different enchantment while still receiving it from his own personal supply would never have been good enough for what he was currently using it for. What about the demons? Have any gone underground yet? It looks like they're staying above to hunt you for now, luckily we were right about their body structures. The gods watching the situation had been observing the demons around Thera and came to a conclusion based on their body structures. Despite how varied each one was from the other, there were 2 things they were sure about: each of them would be suited for tunneling to one extent or another, and despite that, it still shouldn't be as efficient for them as just running, with tunneling likely to be a developed trait to help them hide from any potential threats. Now that they were going to fight, they were going for speed instead. That meant he needed speed above all else, which continued to be his weakest attribute. They set up the main part of the trap as far away as they comfortably could, preparing it under the watchful eyes of the gods who were on guard to warn them about any demons approaching. He just had to hope he'd make it there before anything caught up. His small saving grace was that the cave was deep and the demons made their home towards the end of it. But they were beasts that destroyed worlds, he couldn't depend on that to be enough to let him pull off what he needed to, and the screaming of his god in his head told him it already wasn't looking good. The urge to look back was overwhelming, but he couldn't give in. Anything that slowed him down, even for a second, could be enough to get him killed. He needed his entire focus to be on running, putting one foot in front of the other, not missing a single step as he went. Falling meant death, being too slow meant death, just being unlucky meant death, and not only for him, but likely Will and the ones he wanted to save as well. The passing of time meant nothing to him. Even though it could only have been a few minutes, it felt like hours, and worse, beyond the sound of his own heart beating in his ears he could hear something else. Footsteps, dozens of them pounding against the forest floor and only growing louder as the seconds ticked by. As fear started to grip his heart, he saw his target. What looked like a plain dirt area in front of him, with Will waiting at the end, crouched down but ready to fight. All that mattered was if Ben would live to make it to him. Saying a quick prayer and hoping against hope that all the untested components of his trap wouldn't get him slowly and painfully killed, he crossed the dirt expanse, not slowing down for a second as he could feel the pounding of the earth behind him. He was almost there. Will was only a few feet away. Dodge, his god suddenly screamed at him, but there was no time for him to react, and he felt thick claws tear across his back, ripping his flesh open while at the same time pushing him and the creature that attacked him across the boundary he'd needed. Will got up and threw himself at the demon that had taken him down, and in doing so stopped providing power to an enchantment Ben had created earlier. It was during his first weekend hunt with Thera he realized he couldn't get monsters to just throw themselves into a pit trap, even if it was sufficiently charmed, if the creatures could tell they would die from it. He'd racked his brain to try and figure out a solution to it, but the best he could come up with was to just cover it and reset the trap each time it went off. He probably could have created a trapdoor of sorts to cover it with that could reset itself each time something fell through, but that would mean lugging it into the forest. It was then he started playing around with ideas for magic solutions. Sure, given his lack of mana and Thera's inability to use magic tools without destroying them, it wouldn't be possible unless he decided to waste some of the valuable magic materials he'd been given by her parents, but he wasn't that desperate at the time. Now though things were different. He had Will, who had enough mana that he could make a powerful mage even without having any magic skills himself, and he had the need, so they found a space between two close-by hills, had Will dig it out to be as deep as he could in the span of a couple hours before filling it up with poison spikes, while Ben knocked down a few thin young trees that were long enough to act as beams to cover the whole thing and placed his barrier enchantment on top of it. Because of the size of it and the vast swath of area he needed to cover, he couldn't make the barriers as powerful as he could or else the mana cost would be too high. So instead they needed Will to pour as much of his own into the enchantments as he was able to when he saw them approaching to try and strengthen it so it wouldn't collapse as he crossed it. His friend must have already expended a great deal of it this keeping it in place while he waited so that the shin dirt layer they placed over the barrier would hide the deadly pit below it from the coming beasts, but as Ben turned around, ignoring the pain that tore through his back, he knew it had all been worth it. The force of their fall and the weight of their bodies ensured the spikes did their job, and screams of pain filled the pit as the survivors felt the poison enter their bodies, rapidly rotting their blood from the inside and filling them with agony. It was a good start, but he couldn't celebrate yet. Soon some would escape, and even poisoned and injured, they could still make sure he and Will died with them if they weren't careful. Still, he was comfortable seeing that it worked, and as quickly as he could rushed over to Will, who was fighting not only the demon that got its claws in him but 4 others that managed to escape their fall. He could see the ones that his friend were going against were sleeker than many of the others that were currently skewered in the pit, likely giving him the speed to reach him before the others and jump to safety once the barrier cut out, while at the same time providing advantages for their other activity of burrowing through the ground. His blood was still clearly on one of the thing's front claws as the others swarmed around, sensing his friend was the greatest immediate threat, but Will seemed to be holding his own, avoiding each swipe and getting his own punches in quicker than it could handle. Even 1 on 5, it wasn't a match, no matter how dangerous a small pack of demons might be. A person with awakened skills was a whole other beast compared to an average hunter, and it was obvious why the gods would work so hard just to summon 200 people like that. With every attack avoided and given he could tell Will had victory in hand, he turned back to focus on the next task, killing any survivors in the pit. Since he now knew that demons would eventually turn into invaders after they had caused enough death, which meant they likely had the same life and death magics they would be known for, meaning that any that escaped might be able to heal themselves, or at the very least delay their demise. Something that couldn't be allowed when they were so close to whittling down the numbers. He grabbed his hammer nearby and started running down to where each of them was trapped despite his own injury, seeing spikes piercing all the way through them in some cases, and he got to work, bringing his hammer down one by one. No matter how dangerous a creature was, if you destroyed its brain, that was the end. At least demons seemed to play by that familiar rule. Ben wasn't going to count on that being true of every monster in the world, but as long as it was true of these ones, that was all that mattered. As he went around, bringing death to each of them, he didn't leave a single one unstruck. Now that he knew they were capable of higher levels of intelligence, he couldn't risk that any might be faking their demise, waiting for the right time to strike. As for the ones still struggling, trying to free themselves, and swiping at him with abandon, he took a different approach. He pulled any spikes he could from the ground, and with his hammer carefully found wherever he could that would be close enough to the creature that he could drive it into their flesh while avoiding their teeth and claws, moving on and letting the poison do its work as he went to the next demon and the next, until all around him were dead. He breathed a heavy sigh as he looked at his work, seeing the blood and death around him and hoping it had been enough, but something about it wasn't right. Killing them all was not quick work, and Will should have been down to help finish the remaining ones so they could start their attack on the cave, and fearing the worst he ran back up to him to see the fight still going on. Something was wrong though. Will was clearly the stronger one by far. He could move faster and avoid the creature's attacks and should have been able to continue to deal blow after blow until they were all corpses at his feet, but he didn't, and it was then Ben remembered what he'd been told when Wedro first started talking to them about their demon hunt. The sorrow. An affliction of the mind that made it hard for a person to kill demons. Ben had no issue and assumed it was some sort of magic passive effect that he was immune to, but Will was clearly not. He wanted to give his friend a chance to get past it himself, but they didn't have the time for that. There were people to save, so as calmly as he could, ignoring the pain that filled both his body and especially his back, he snuck up behind the group as Will continued to fend it off and brought his hammer down, delivered the finishing blow to one while quickly bringing the swing to the next and the next, finishing off 3 in quick order. Unfortunately, from there the element of surprise was gone, and the 2 remaining beasts were on their toes, weary of him and ready to strike. His only advantage was despite the fact that Will couldn't finish them off, they were battered and beaten, weakened to the point that even he could stand a chance, and he wasn't going to let anything get in his way. Ignoring any sense of danger he threw himself at the first one, putting the full force of his hammer behind his swing as he took out one of their jaws, just barely missing the head that could have given him the kill. His first instinct was to jump back to a safer range, to avoid a counterattack, but instead he pushed forward and swung again, a move the demon never expected. It tried to protect itself the best it could, reaching out a claw and tearing into his bicep, but the pain wasn't enough to keep Ben's hammer from coming down, and this time his aim was true. The demon's skull shattered under his blow, and he felt a brief moment of victory before he was forced to the ground by the remaining one, his body battered and bleeding as he tried to shake it off, but without luck. There was a moment he thought he was done for, that he'd tried hard but hadn't been good enough, so now he had to face his end, but seeing his friend on the ground about to be torn apart was enough for Will to get past his hesitation and whatever was keeping him from fighting at his full strength. With a lunge, he tackled the beast off of Ben and went for the kill, finishing their fight. Stealth level increased. Acquired skill hammer wielder level 0. Laying down, battered and bleeding, he couldn't help but just be happy to still be alive. Getting the skill he'd been working towards and his stealth level finally increasing after almost a year of use was just a nice bonus he tried to enjoy as he got up and made his way to his friend. The moment Will gathered his resolve to fight the creature and took the life from it, he immediately felt the effects of the sorrow. His eyes went wide with shock and he had to run to the side to vomit as grief filled his body. "You okay, man?" Ben asked in both concern, but also hurry. They needed to get to the others and soon, and if Will didn't think he could kill anything remaining in the cave, that meant he would need to deliver the finishing blow to all of them. "I'm good, I just wasn't expecting things to go like that. It just felt so wrong." "Yeah, I hear passive effects are a bitch. I'm sorry, I know you aren't doing well, but I need you to pull yourself together so we can save the others. Think you can manage?" "Yeah, I'm good." "Cool, Myriad, what's the word?" "Nothing good. The invader seemed to be able to feel the death of the demons and left the cave moments ago before going underground, so we don't know where it is." "You're a god, can't you see down there? We can look down on the world or detect the vicinity of our believers. The near omniscience you're looking for is exclusive to worlds that singular gods rule over, not one like this." "Damn it, okay, and the others?" Only a handful of demons had been left with them and Thera managed to take care of them. They're coming to meet you now. Wait, they should be waiting in the cave for us to come get them. If we don't know where the last one is, and they spent the entire time having their mana drained, they won't be able to fight. Thera will, and as for the others, well, they didn't want to risk being trapped in the cave in the event anything came back. Damn it, okay. Will, come on, we've got to move. There wasn't time to let his friend feel better, not when the biggest threat of all was out there and couldn't be located while their friends were trying to get to them. If they could just meet up and give the space mages enough time to regain their mana so they could all teleport away, then they would be fine. They just had to get there. With all of that in mind, they moved as fast as they could despite their injuries. Well, Ben's injuries. Will had come out of the fight physically unscathed, it was mentally where he was having problems, but they couldn't let anything hold them back as they ran. Myriad was directing him to them as Analia was guiding Thera, and before long they were within sight of one another. Ben and Will breathed a sigh of relief seeing them all alive and gave a wave, their pace slowing down as the accumulated stress left their bodies. That was their greatest mistake. The earth exploded around them before he could react and Will was thrown to the side as Ben was suspended in the air, pain filling him. He looked at what had him and found a demon, hominid in shape and bloodlust pouring from it. Ben's first instinct was to run from it, to shake himself from its grip, but as he looked down he realized with horror that he wasn't being held, he was being pierced. The creature's claw had torn through his abdomen and out his back. He coughed up blood and knew things weren't looking good. He thought he heard screaming in the distance, but couldn't be sure over the screams of the creature in the process of killing him. You! It roared with a rage Ben had never before experienced. You ruined everything. How could something so pathetic and weak have the blood of so many of my kind on it? Ben knew with a level of certainty he was done for. A claw tearing through his internal organs wasn't something he could just walk away from, and he could already tell the monster that had him was leagues above anything he'd seen in the world. It was like being in front of a mountain he knew he couldn't climb. So this is an invader. He thought to himself, and could only be grateful it hadn't run out with the rest of the demons when he hurled his taunt into the cave. If this creature treated him seriously from the start, then things would have gone much different. And yet, despite all of that, Ben was still feeling like antagonizing it. Says the guy related to a big pile of corpses. He wished he could have thought of something more clever, but the pain was intense and he wasn't sure he had much longer. Still, it got the job done as the creature's rage became so thick he thought he could cut it. He was sure the thing was going to finish him then and there, but instead it stared at him for a moment before turning to his friends and stretching out a hand, prepared to attack. No! Ben yelled, unwilling to let this monster go through with whatever it had planned, and did the only thing he could think to do. He connected with it. All of the pain he'd been feeling from the beating he'd taken rushed into the creature as the creature's overwhelming rage rushed into him, and Ben felt it preparing a skill, the effects of his connection not being enough to shake a monster like this, so he did what he could to make it worse. Using both of his minds and the effects of his 4 levels of blessed focus, he directed every bit of himself to feeling the pain he was in, exploring his suffering in the most horrifying way he could so the invader would have to feel it too, and it was just enough. The flow of whatever skill it attempted was disrupted, and it was enough for a swift counterattack from the others while it was distracted. Ben wasn't even sure what they did. One moment he was connected to the monster, seeing the rage on its face, and the next the connection was broken almost instantly, and its head was gone. It took a moment for the creature's body to realize that fact, but when it did it collapsed on the ground, Ben coming with it and feeling the pain of the fall. He was still stuck on its arm, but it didn't matter. Everyone was safe, and he was feeling tired. All of the stress that accumulated since Thera was taken had left him and he closed his eyes. Complex mind level increased. Hey demons, hope you're ready to be exterminated. She heard being yelled into the cave from a voice she knew well. Ben? It seems your friend has begun. Now we simply need to wait for the results, her god said, worry filling her voice. The talking demon, who Analia had explained was an invader, had returned by this point and was sitting amongst the other demons, and upon hearing the yell sent the majority out to hunt Ben down, leaving only 5 in the cave with it. Thera couldn't help but be terrified for her friend. There was only him and Will, how would he manage against all of that? Try to relax, Thera, if things go as well as he hopes, then you'll need to escape if you can. How am I supposed to do that though? She was pretending to be asleep, her eyes open only a crack to watch the room, but the invader seemed to be able to sense that she still had abundant mana and was keeping a close eye on her to be safe. She wouldn't be able to fight it, let alone the other 5 demons in the cave. Hopefully the rest will run off to attack the other 2 as well so you and the others can get out, but for now just hold tight. At worst, you'll just have to hope they can get here to help after they're done. She waited patiently, hoping that an opening would come where they could escape, but the advantage she got was far smaller than she'd hoped. As the time passed, the invader began seeming more and more agitated until it left the cave, but the demons remained. Still, it was the best she could hope for, the only question was what to do about it. She supposedly had a staff waiting for her outside, but she wouldn't be able to get it. That meant that if she wanted to do anything it would have to be with whatever power she could muster herself, but would she be able to control it without bringing the entire cave down? She could always wait and hope that Ben would succeed, but she couldn't be so optimistic. If he failed, then she would never have a better chance than this to do anything, she couldn't let it go to waste. She looked to the ceiling of the cave above where 4 of the demons laid, thick stalactites hanging from it. She and the other 2 were far enough away that they would likely be fine, but the biggest issue was the last demon laying by her feet. Whatever amount of charm it was under had made it want to cling to her, only moving when it went to replace the mana vipers, which meant that was when it was time to strike. Luckily she didn't have to wait long. The demon walked up to her and took hold of the mana vipers, biting into her arm. Their teeth were thin and small, but the experience of having so many bite into her repeatedly like that was still unpleasant, and having them removed was a relief. As the demon walked over to drop off the ones that had been feeding off her where the other demons lay, she took her chance to strike. Raising her hand, she reached out with her mana towards the stalactites, trying to bring them down. She needed to be delicate. More careful than she'd ever been before. If she messed up, the risk of all of them dying was too great. All she wanted to do was bring down the stone spikes onto the demons below, and with an effort of will she exerted her mana. Unfortunately, her control was still lacking, and she pulled the entire ceiling above the demons down instead, thoroughly crushing them all. Oops. A small part of her was horrified at killing them, but she was able to recognize it as a result of the sorrow. Knowing she was feeling the final effects of a creature's skill made it easier to deal with, but the worry about what came next had an even greater effect. I suggest you grab the others and get out of here as fast as you can, Analia advised. There's no guarantee major structural damage hasn't happened within the cave. Will do. She thought to her god awkwardly, rushing over to Steph and Wedro to rip the mana vipers from their flesh before struggling to carry them out. While her previous dancer job gave some bonuses to strength, it was still her lowest attribute by far, and she had to treat Wedro's long worm-like body as she would a scarf just to be able to quickly pull Steph out in her arms. Leaving the cave was exhilarating. Being trapped there amongst the greatest threat to her planet had been a terrifying experience, made worse during the walkout as rocks occasionally came loose from the ceiling, but breathing the fresh air was something she wouldn't be taking for granted again. She put the other 2 down as she went to look for her staff, Analia directing her to where it was hidden while Steph and Wedro, they slowly woke up after being freed from the vipers. What happened? Steph asked, recovering from the effects of constant mana exhaustion quicker than Thera expected considering how Ben usually handled it, but then again, Steph and Wedro were proper mages. They likely had more experience dealing with it and training to react quicker after it. Passing out in a fight was deadly after all. If you did end up mana exhausted, then the correct move would be to get up and away as soon as possible. Wedro was looking for answers too, so Thera explained as well as she could what had happened to all of them, and what Ben and Will were in the middle of doing as a result. Then we have to help them. Steph yelled after learning everything that had gone down. We can't just leave them to die. Wedro, however, was less willing to rush to their side. If we don't let our mana regenerate more, we'll be nothing but potential hostages. It would be safer for all of us to wait. Thera was torn. She wanted to rush to Ben's side to help him, but she was the only one with any mana. If she ran off they would be defenseless. Your friends managed to kill all of the demons, Analia spoke in her mind, breaking her train of thought. All that remains is the invader. Then that makes the choice significantly easier, doesn't it? All but one of the demons is dead. Unfortunately, it's the most dangerous one by far, but we'll be better off regrouping with the others than just staying here and hoping it doesn't catch us while we're defenseless. And how could you possibly know that? The worm asked, curiously. My God told me, a statement that could end any argument on the matter. They rushed through the woods, but the emotional payoff was immense when they saw Ben and Will off in the distance waving to them. Thera let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding and felt her entire body relax. They were all together again, and as soon as Wedro and Steph had enough mana they could get home. Seeing her friend made her renew her energy as she and the others picked up their pace to meet them as her worst nightmares came true before her eyes. The ground beneath Ben erupted and Will was thrown to the side as the invader tore through the earth and impaled Ben on its arm. She thought she heard Steph scream, maybe she had herself, it was impossible to tell. Her breath caught in her throat and time felt like it slowed down. She could see the monster saying something to him but couldn't tell what, and she knew the shock was impacting her actions. It wasn't until it stretched out a clawed hand towards them that she acted, raising her staff and pouring all of her rage into a single earth spear. In the back of her mind, she knew she wasn't quick enough to attack something like that, but the invader hadn't made its move. Ben was surely buying time and she couldn't let it go to waste. More mana went into that one spell than she'd ever forced into such a controlled attack before and let it loose with all of the emotion she couldn't contain watching her friend slowly die. Her staff turned to dust in her hand as the speed of the spell firing created a powerful gust of wind around them. Earth magic level increased. Her aim was true and the demon didn't have time to react to it, nothing could. Its head was destroyed in an instant as her spear continued to tear through the forest, but she ignored everything else as she ran towards it as it crumpled to the ground, taking Ben with it. She screamed his name but got no answer. All she knew was that it was bad. She wasn't sure about how human anatomy compared to that of other races, but it was likely multiple major organs were damaged or destroyed. All but a death sentence. When she got to him she took his hand and tried not to panic. He'll be okay. He's always bouncing back from things like this, he'll be fine. She told herself as she noticed the others catching up and gathering around her. Steph, heal him, she told the girl crying behind her, but not getting any answer. What are you waiting for? You're the only healer, you have to do something. Thera, even if I had the mana for it, I can't regenerate entire organs, Steph said, voice shaking. Something of this scale would be just below resurrection in difficulty. Perhaps she could do it if she was more practiced with her skill, or had all of her mana and days to work with, but not at a speed that could save her friend's life. They were all silent as Thera squeezed his hand tighter, tears falling down her face. She knew Steph was right, but she wouldn't accept it, she couldn't. Ben was constantly getting seriously injured and making it through. All they needed was a single option, even a sliver of hope. A sliver Will provided. What if you didn't need to regenerate the organs? Will quietly asked, reaching down to grab the spatial bag Ben had on him and pulled out the knife within. What are you thinking? Thera asked desperately. A transplant. Ben needs organs, and that, he said, pointing to the demon's corpse, has all of its own in good shape. You can't just shove random organs into someone and expect it to work, Steph argued. We don't even know if demons have anything comparable to human organs, and even if they do it's basically certain they'll be rejected. All we'd be doing is giving him a more painful and drawn-out death. Or time for us to find another solution. He argued. Thera's right, we have to do something. I just need to know if it could work. It might. It was all Will needed. He took the knife and cut open the creature's chest, revealing the organs within. Thera could tell immediately that its internal structure was nothing like a succubus, and judging from Steph's reaction, the same was true for humans. If they couldn't even tell what they would need to try with, then all they could do was pray for a miracle. Luckily for her, Analia was still listening. Thera, you're all going to need to move fast if you're going to do this, so listen to what I say and follow it to the letter. Instruct Will to cut out the small blue organ with 7 centimeters of the connecting tubing on the left, as well as the large wrinkled purple organ attached to it, but only immediately after cutting out the arm stuck in Ben. After, you'll have to open his chest cavity, and I'll direct you where to have your healer work from there. Thera immediately did as she was told, passing on the instructions as they got to work. None of them had time to be squeamish when the amount of time Ben had might only be in the minutes. Steph got to work using her high life magic to attach the organs as quickly as she could before closing the hole in his chest, pushing past her limits and mana to save his life and falling into mana exhaustion, but not before getting what she needed to done. Will caught her as she passed out, and Thera let herself breathe a small sigh of relief, thinking they were done, until Analia spoke up. Not good. What? She asked in panic. What do you mean not good? Aren't we done? Steph got everything attached, what else is there? Steph was right about his body rejecting them, and a forest is the wrong place to be attempting anything like an organ transplant. His body needs to be flooded with life magic and healing spells to keep him alive. Without that, nothing's going to take. You might have bought a few more minutes, but that's all. Damn it! She screamed, not caring about the others around. They knew she was talking to her god, so they knew it couldn't be good. How were they supposed to deal with that? Steph had used up all of the mana she'd regenerated since they'd escaped the cave. She didn't know what her mana capacity was, but there was no way she'd be able to keep that up until they made it somewhere with a proper clinic, especially when the girl was already running on fumes. There was only one person amongst them who could. Tell me what spells I need to use. Thera. I'll make it work. Just tell me what I need to do, please. Analia heard the desperation in her believer's voice and gave in, having faith in the half-spirit as Thera placed her hands over Ben and focused. She remembered how Steph had felt when using life mana before when they'd connected, and tried to feel the same, to make it work through force of will alone if she had to. Nothing happened, but she didn't give up, she couldn't. She didn't care how hard it would be, she needed this to work. Still nothing happened. I can't just let him die, I can't. She felt mana pouring out of her in a torrent. The earth shook and creatures miles around started moving in her direction, but she didn't care, those weren't the magic she needed. All she was trying to get was whatever tiny trickle of life mana existed within her so she could turn it into a stream. Rocks started pulling themselves from the ground and hanging in the air as the closest beasts in range got to them, needing to be fought off by will to keep them all safe, but none of that was important. She would spend 1,000 people's worth of mana and permanently reshape the untamed lands if that's what it took, and she tried even harder, feeling more and more mana escape her. Amongst all the chaos her uncontrolled mana was causing, other effects not so easily seen were taking place. The roots of grass and surrounding trees grew deeper and thicker, while at the same time mold spores began securing to the various leaves around the forest, and fungi as a whole proliferated. Worms and bugs beneath the surface were strengthened by the mana they felt while nearby flowers bloomed and Ben's breathing grew just a little easier. Acquired skill life magic level 0. From there, you'll need to alternate between casting Detoxify and Low Heal constantly until your space mages have enough mana to transfer you all, Analia told her believer as she watched above in her realm. When the one called Steph wakes up and regains some of her mana, get her to cast the highest form of Detoxify she can manage on him as well, and immune enhancement everywhere but the organs that have been transferred. If those receive an extreme immune response, he'll likely die immediately. Thera didn't say anything and simply did as she was told, but her god wouldn't fault her for it. She had to put all of her focus into using a level 0 magic she'd only just acquired on someone whose resistance to it would trouble anyone but an awakened skill user. The fact that she was pushing herself so hard was something worthy of praise, which Analia was going to ensure she would get. After all, Thera had been an uncut gem for too long. It was growing time for the world to see what she would be capable of given the proper resources. "I really can't thank you enough," said the floating cube beside her. Myriad's voice was filled with worry, and none of the other gods present could fault him for that. He was well known for the longest time for his unfortunate state, trapped in the same condition as the forbidden gods, by virtue of his people's sacrifice to deal a major blow against the invaders. While many gods felt discomfort around him due to his nature as a partially artificial divine being, as well as the extreme act his people committed as a final defiance over those who would lust for their world, enough others took pity on him as he made his way to this world, sharing some of their own meager faith and giving him work to ease their own burdens as an excuse to provide some of the power they'd receive as payment. In the centuries he'd been on the world, it was genuinely nice to see the pleasant little cube get a believer and grow his faith, if only a little, and now that his apostle who helped make all that possible was in such a state, none could blame him for his concern. Unfortunately, Ben is still far from safe. I've heard the reports from their world that such treatment is possible, but we lack those strengths, and worse still that the organs had to come from an invader. Even if he gets back, it's impossible to say how long it would take a life mage to adapt them to his body. If only the life gods hadn't had to weaken themselves just to construct bodies for the otherworlders, one of the gathered gods lamented. It's hard enough exerting influence on the world, even if your divinity is suited to the act. For us to only be able to watch as such a promising young mortal might lose their life. Unlike the mortals, who had significantly more strength than any time in the past when a world was invaded thanks to the system in place, the gods were all significantly weaker. It couldn't be helped, it was a side effect of so many of them being gathered in one world with only a handful of believers devoted to each of them. Their strength was nothing compared to what it once was. "We can do more than watch," she told them, not ready to give up on the boy that managed to pique her interest during her trial. "I've already instructed the leader of my people's nation to send healers over to Stonewall as soon as they can, while telling the one I have there already to have their clinic prepared for an emergency case. If any of you have healers that can be spared as well, then it would be appreciated. They should be back there after just a few hours once the mage Wedro has enough mana for the jump, so the faster you can act the better." It was fortunate they had one of the only awakened spatial mages in the world with them. The mana cost for jumping to a place they'd already been was nothing compared to going in blind to a new location. Even better though was the agreement of all gods present. There were only 20 there, and Analia was the most powerful one by far, but they had all witnessed how hard the boy worked to save his friend and were moved to act. After all, what was the point of power if not used at times like this? Myriad's emotions couldn't be contained as he gave his thanks to everyone present, but with everything they could do for Ben done, it was time to move on to the most important part of their meeting. "The issue now," Analia began, taking charge of the discussion, "is determining how this happened." The mood went tense as they thought about what they'd seen. A horde that big didn't just happen, even if they were neglectful, especially not a horde with a fully formed invader in the mix. It had been well over 1,000 years since such a thing had occurred, and the most likely explanation was that it happened the same way as the previous time. "I'll say what I'm sure we're all thinking," one of the gods with an appearance somewhere between a sunfish and tarantula said. "It has to be a case of demon worshippers, doesn't it? How else could they have grown to be such a big group, or for the invader to have learned world speak?" Everyone murmured amongst themselves, but they'd all come to the same conclusion as well. A group that had existed in the past, with varying beliefs about demons, that they were gods, or at the very least might spare them if treated as gods. They had been wiped out after a disastrous event where they'd managed to raise a group of demons in secret, even bringing 2 of them up to sapience in the process, but they were meant to all be destroyed along with their dangerous beliefs. Whether some had persisted in secret and had been biding their time for the day the demons would arrive, or if this was a new group that had formed, only one thing was clear. They needed to be hunted down and destroyed. A group like that couldn't be permitted to exist, especially not so close to their approaching war. Analia could only sigh, for such a thing to happen now of all times, she couldn't imagine much worse happening for the world. For now, I'll make sure to pass on the message to all of the other gods, and it would be best to inform the leaders of your faith and nations. If a group of demon worshippers have been working in secret for who knows how long, then there may be more hordes out there, or worse, more invaders. We'll need to all begin investigating immediately. The agreement was unanimous, and they all went their separate ways to begin pushing their people into motion, feeling a crushing fear within themselves that it would be their own precious mortals that would prove to be the world's undoing. A figure silently walked through the forest, its invisibility keeping it safe from prying eyes as it made the long trek home. There was much that needed to be said to its people, decisions that needed to be made, but that would come second. As he arrived at his home, he ignored the questions of the people surrounding him, they would get their answers in time. Instead, he made his way to the center of the village and stopped before one of the many statues their ancestors had painstakingly constructed, kneeled down before it, and began to pray. "Hello, child," a voice spoke in his head. "I take it you've seen your mission through to the end." "I have, my lord," it spoke aloud, letting the gathered masses hear his half of the conversation at least. "I'm sorry to say, but before I could eradicate the wise beast and retrieve the lesser ones, they were found by a group of strange ones." "I see," the voice said, keeping its tone neutral. "And how did you react to their arrival?" "I must apologize. Given the information I had, I wasn't sure if collecting the lesser ones like you ordered would trump our founding rule of not interacting with the strange ones, so I resolved myself to wait to the side to see how events would transpire, and as a result all of the lesser ones were killed. I am ready to accept any punishment you deem fit for my failings." "It is unnecessary, you made the most appropriate choice you could given the time. Unfortunately, the village must be moved for the sake of everyone's safety." It would have been better for the ones who found the lesser ones to be killed, but the voice couldn't fault him on that. It acted on the information it had, and a resource like him couldn't be wasted just to punish it. "Pardon my insolence, my lord, but is that so necessary? My presence was not detected and our group has grown large, it won't be easy to move everyone, especially the young." "You have your orders," it said, a hint of anger coming to its voice for being questioned like that. "I don't care how large the village has gotten, you all must be ready to move before the sun falls and march through the night. You must get deeper into the forest depths. Should you fail, you'll be rewarded with the punishment you seem to desire." The figure looked up to the statue, violet eyes shining in the few remaining hours of daylight filtering through the trees. "It will be done."